Yes, yes, yes. What is up, General Strike Podcast family? Another weekly edition of the show live on YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter. Should be a jam-packed show. Everything from Lula da Silva being absolutely annulled from his corruption charges to Ecuador's elections to making fun of Ben Shapiro. It should be a fun show. And of course, as the title of the show says, I will be talking about, is China socialist? And the reason why, because usually I leave the theory and the history and the news topics for like the first half of the show, and then we make fun of like the Shapiros and the Dave Rubins and all those fucking awful people in the second half of the show, usually what we do. But because I saw a PragerU video titled something about China being capitalism or capitalistic, I thought, well, this is a good marriage of the fun topics and, theory and history and politics and all that fun stuff. So it should be a jam-packed one. Jordan Peterson obviously has been doing a media tour, so I will be watching some more Jordan Peterson clips. And finally, he talks about Marxism, really, with Brett Weinstein, who was just... man, the IDW. That was a good era, right, guys, of the internet? That was a great era, the IDW. Sam... what's his name? Fuck, why am I forgetting his name? Shit. The atheist. The guy that I hate. Oh my god. Sam Harris. Sam Harris, Joe Rogan, Jordan Peterson, the Weinstein brothers, Dave Rubin, Ben Shapiro. That was a fun click for a time. But anyways, without further ado, let's get into all the topics because we do have a lot to get into on today's show. Remember, hit the like button, share the show. All that free stuff, patreon.com if you want to support the channel in any financial way. But remember, all content is free. Let's get into it. Obviously, we got to talk about our boy, Lula da Silva, being back. He's back, guys. The Brazilian Supreme Court has annulled basically all the charges against him, all four corruption charges that stemmed from an accusation that he gave basically a piggyback job to a construction company for a beachfront apartment and a farmhouse and some other things. They've all been thrown out to a large degree. There is some caveat of maybe you have a retrial here in the next 6 months before the next election starts, but most likely that is not happening. Most likely we are going to see Lula da Silva face off against Jair Bolsonaro in the Brazilian election next year. And the knockoff effect of that is going to be massive. Obviously, Lula da Silva and his Workers' Party has been instrumental within Brazil domestically for improving the economic well-being, the health and prosperity of the Brazilian people. Lula da Silva coming from a trade union background. He's always been pro-union and pro-working class. My only issue with Lula, and this is a minor one, is that he has at times placated to U.S. imperialism, especially with Haiti. And obviously with what's happening in Haiti recently with their unrest and their, honestly, a social revolution happening as we speak. It's important to understand that Lula da Silva was someone that partook in basically a coup and neocolonial oppression on Haiti in the early 2000s with the Aristide presidency. So it's important to understand the context here. Like, Lula is not the perfect person in the world. He's not the perfect communist, and no one is, of course. And even I would say like has far and away social democratic tendencies more so than communist tendencies, of course. But what he has done for the Brazilian people when he was the president, as well as the support he did give to a large majority of Latin American socialist movements and organizations and political parties. The big blemish in Haiti for him, to me, does not diminish what he has done for Venezuela, for Nicaragua, for Bolivia, and obviously for Brazil itself. And I think that cannot be understated. It's important to critique him for the things he's done wrong, but let's be honest here. The difference between him and Bolsonaro is exponential. what Lula can do for the Brazilian people in terms of giving the wealth back to the Brazilian people instead of multinational corporations that suck the wealth out of Brazil and use its labor force, use that labor power to extrapolate the wealth from Brazil. Lula will change that. He will. Domestically, we're going to see a significant change for the Brazilian people, let alone like for the social well-being of the Brazilian people. Bolsonaro has been famously homophobic and has persecuted the LGBTQ plus community. Lula won't do that. So, you see some sort of social benefits as well, let alone economic benefits. Massive change for the upcoming Brazilian election, as obviously we saw last year with Bolivia's election, which we're going to talk about as well. Ecuador, which just happened just a few weeks ago and is continuing to happen. We're going to talk about that as well, unfortunately. Hopefully we see this continual push for socialist parties, for workers' parties in the global South and especially Latin America. Because I've always been in the mindset, especially as I've become more of a radical, of course, that the way to attack the imperial base is on the frontiers. Like if you look at any empire in history, the start of their fragmentation and dissolution is often attacks on the frontier, a losing of legitimacy on the frontier. Think of the Roman Empire, think of the Mongolian Empire, think of the Chinese Empire in ancient times, like think of the Persian Empire, think of the Greek Empire, like think about any empire that happens. And you look at the colonies, the neo-colonies of the U.S. empire, it's really important to focus on that frontier and how that can deteriorate even the imperial core. Scott Brown, what up, Scott? Hope you're doing well, man. Saying I thought you were from Portugal. I am from Portugal. Not like literally from there. My family's from there. I'm second generation Portuguese and Spanish. I got family in Madrid, I think still. I don't think they've moved. But digressing. Really, obviously, important to pay attention to what's happening in Latin America. Before we move on to other Latin American news, I want to play this clip from Democracy Now! To just sort of add context and, higher production quality, of course, of these charges being dropped and will Lula challenge Bolsonaro in next year's election. And there's debate about whether or not he will challenge. He is, 75 years old. He is somebody that you could see trying to pass the baton to someone else. But he is still probably one of the most popular politicians in the world. Like I even saw a headline, I think it was by The Guardian, which, obviously really pro-socialism right there. The Guardian, I think, said something to the effect of like Lula's, quotes, the most popular politician in the world, and then end quotes, right? And then it continues the headline, plots his revenge. And it's like, come on. Like, what are we doing here? What's the framing here? Anyways, let's play this clip from Democracy Now! And I have some criticism for them later on in the show too, but Democracy Now! They do a lot of good work, so always have to give them credit. Come on. Really?
Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman, joined remotely by my co-host, Nermeen Sheikh. Hi, Nermeen.
Hi, Amy, and welcome to our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world.
Well, former Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva has been cleared to run for president again after a judge annulled all convictions against him. 3 years ago, Lula had been considered a favorite in the lead up to the 2018 presidential election until he was put in jail for 18 months and forced out of the race. The jailing of Lula helped pave the way for the election of the far-right former military officer Jair Bolsonaro. Lula is a former union leader who served as president of Brazil from 2003 to 2010. During that time, he helped lift tens of millions of Brazilians out of poverty. President Barack Obama once called him the most popular politician on earth. On Wednesday, Lula blasted Bolsonaro's handling of the COVID crisis.
Many of the COVID deaths could have been avoided if there were a government who did their job. This country is disorganized and falling apart because it has no government. There was a president who invented chloroquine, a president who said that those who were scared of COVID are sissies, that COVID was just a little flu, that COVID was something for cowards, that he was a former athlete and it would not affect him. That is not the role of a president of the republic in a civilized country.
More than 270,000 Brazilians have died over the past year from COVID, the second highest figure in the world behind the United States. On Wednesday, Brazil reported nearly 2,300 new deaths, its highest daily death toll since the start of the pandemic. Lula also criticized Bolsonaro's skepticism over COVID vaccines and Brazil's delay.
I assume I was going to mention at some point, but obviously, Bolsonaro was seen as that wave of fascism that came in with Trump, Bolsonaro, Boris Johnson to a degree. Le Pen almost won the election in France, and there was this wave of fascism, obviously in the West. Let alone you get like Eastern Europe, which is obviously since the 1990s has been a hotbed for fascism ever since the overthrow of communism. But anyways, digressing.
Delays in obtaining them.
The question of the vaccine, it is not a question if you have money or if you don't. It is a question of life or death. It is a question of knowing what is the role of the president of the republic to take care of, because a president is not elected to spread fake news.
In his speech, Lula also compared Bolsonaro to Donald Trump.
This country is disorganized and falling apart because it has no government. I will repeat, this country has no government. And with fake news, the world elected former President Donald Trump. And with fake news, the world elected Bolsonaro.
We go now to Brazil, where we're joined by Valesca Martins, one of President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva's lead attorneys, co-author of Lawfare, Waging War Through Law. She's the founder of the Lawfare Institute. We welcome you to Democracy Now! Thanks so much for joining us, Valesca. Can you talk about the significance of the judge's annulment of the charges against Lula, for which he already served time in prison, and what this means for the future and this major address that Lula gave yesterday?
Thank you, Amy, for inviting me to come over here today and briefly describe what is being now called as the biggest scandal, judicial scandal on earth. Lula was wrongfully charged, wrongfully prosecuted, illegally prosecuted by the car wash operation, which now we know that acted in collusion with the prosecutors and the presiding judge of the case. I think it means, first of all, that the rule of law in Brazil came out as a winner, that democracy came out winning, because Lula, as you already mentioned, in 2018 should have run for president. He was illegally removed from the race. He was in jail for 580 days. During that period, he lost his brother. He was not allowed to even actually go to his brother's funeral. He lost his grandchild who died of a disease at an early age. He could not go freely to his funeral as well. He lost his political rights. He lost all of his rights, not only financially speaking. The presumption of it, his presumption of innocence was highly violated, which is a gross violation of human rights. So after 5 years, which comes in a delay, he was declared not innocent, because actually the procedures will go on, but all of the procedures since the charges, not only the convictions, but all procedures against President Lula within the car wash operation have been annulled. This means that he can run for president. He has all of his political rights standing. He's a citizen that should be presumed innocent before everybody's eyes.
Well, Valeska, could you explain, though, as you mentioned, the annulment was a procedural decision, not a substantive one. So Lula could still be tried and will be tried in federal court. Do you know when this retrial will occur and what the implications of it could be?
Actually, Amy, because we were fighting in a court which had a clear bias nature, in a clear unfair trial.
I'm sorry, I've been doing other stuff at the same time. I'm hoping that they mentioned that, like, it was found out that the Brazilian judge in the case was colluding, like literally was in contact with the prosecution and planning the trial as it was going on. Like, imagine if you're on trial and you can go to jail for years, right? And the judge that's supposed to be the unbiased adjudicator of the case, right? They're consorting with your prosecution to get you more time. It's insanity. It was a completely politically motivated hit job on Lula da Silva.
Which did not take in regard any of the numerous evidences, overwhelming evidences of his innocence. We believe that if a new judge comes in charge to preside over any case, retry this case, it is imperative that he does not even respond to any charges arising from the car wash operation. We have the trial and the pre-trial situation regarding these cases, and they're all no. They are all no. We have been saying that the full application of the law has to come in force in this case. And Lula is not above the law, but nobody's above the law. And in a major complex case, we have come across overwhelming evidence of collusion between the prosecutors and the presiding judge of the case, former Judge Moro, which have described in unheard messages, which have been filed now before the Supreme Court, that they had a Lula plan, which meant create enough charges to overwhelm the defense, to occupy the defense's time and resources in order for them to convict him and remove him from his political life.
Well, let me go to Lula in his own words. In 2018, we spoke with Brazil's former president, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, popularly known as Lula, when he was running for president. At the time, he was facing a possible prison term on what obviously many believe to be trumped-up corruption charges tied to the sprawling probe known as Operation Car Wash. This is what he said.
I was not accused of corruption. I was accused because of a lie in a police investigation, a lie in an indictment by the Office of the Attorney General, and in the judgment of Judge Moro.
Scott, I know you're probably the only one listening and like one other person. Have I played the Illicit History like mini documentary episode about Lula da Silva? Have I played that video on this show yet? I know I posted on my Instagram like a while ago, but I wonder if I played on the show. If I didn't, let me know, because that's really good. It's only like 10, 12 minutes. Like, I might play that too, just so people can have a background understanding of how Lula got to where he's at. And it's obviously done by the great late Michael Brooks. You know, rest in peace to him always. Sorry. Anytime I can, share the stuff that he created, I will. That guy was a massive influence on me and the stuff that I do.
Because there's only one evidence of my innocence in this entire trial,
que meus advogados de defesa fizeram de forma magistral,
which my defense counsel explained in a magisterial manner.
So that was about a month before he was imprisoned. Now, in this major address that looked like really a campaign rally at his union, the Metal Workers Union, where he had also gone right before he went to jail, he had banners proclaiming health, jobs, and justice for Brazil. Is this the beginning of his presidential campaign? And can you talk about particularly COVID and his attack on Bolsonaro around the pandemic, dealing with it?
I think the importance of Lula's restoration of his political rights is the fact that, I mean, if in 2022 he decides to run, he will be able to run.
Scott Brown saying, I don't know. I'm assuming you're answering my question, but if I play that video, I will play it now then, if you haven't seen it. I think it's really good background for just Brazil as a political entity and ecosystem, right? But he said, I'm not as into foreign government, or I should say politics, mostly U.S. politics. Scott, I will say this. I always forget where you're from, Scott. For some reason, I always think that you're in the UK. I don't know why. I want to say you're not from the UK. I want to say you're from like the Midwest. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Just curious. I do think that there is the lack of knowledge. I'll speak for me and what my experience is, right? The lack of knowledge that U.S. citizens have of world politics, I think is on purpose. Like, I think it's something that has been a concerted effort by the establishment ruling class. So we don't know how, we get our wealth here. Chicago, see, boom, I knew it. I knew it was the Midwest. I knew it was the Midwest, Scott. Damn, I'm so good. I think that it's something that we are lacking in terms of knowledge and understanding, and even like me to a degree. Like, I'm not, when I bring up these topics, know that I'm often learning with you guys. Like, I'm not an expert in any of these fields. Like, this is just something that I am interested in. Therefore, I want to talk about it. I like talking about it on a public forum so I can get other people to talk about it too, and just share information, right? Maybe it's wrong information. Maybe it's not. I think everyone should use critical thinking whenever they intake political theory or history. However, I do think we are not taught political theory and history from outside of our dichotomy, that Republican Democrat dichotomy, for specific reasons. Like, why are U.S. companies in Latin America? You know, like, think about it. Like, think about like why you have like GM in Panama with factories. Why? Do they build better cars there than they do in Detroit? No, you know, that's not the case. It's cheap labor. You know, why does the U.S. want to be involved with countries like Venezuela or Bolivia? Why do you see them always talking about them in a negative light? Why do you see them always sanctioning them? Why do you see this negative reaction to them? And not really any attempt to understand these countries, understand the people living in these countries, and the plurality of people in these countries. It's never an attempt by the U.S. media sphere, U.S. Political sphere. It's never an attempt to do that. Why? Because we want access to their resources. You know, until the price of oil bottomed out, Venezuelan oil was a highly sought after commodity and still is by the U.S., even with the bottoming out of the pricing. Why do we focus on Bolivia for the last 2 or 3 years? Because of the influx of smart cars. How do you get smart cars? You need lithium batteries. Where's one of the biggest depositories of lithium in the world? Bolivia. You know what I mean? It's really important to start understanding how these different governments, political institutions, parties, movements, systems, how they connect, where they meet, because they all do meet. There are connection points between all these things. They are always in motion, always fluid. And it's important to try to analyze that motion, analyze that fluctuation and the systems in the world. Anyways, Scott saying Matt cares about the guys who troll him. LOL. I do, Scott. I care. And you don't even troll me that much, Scott. You definitely troll other people. Most of the time, I just ignore your trolling. It's not even that good. Up your game, buddy. Oh, so good. So good. Anyways, I totally forgot as I was talking because I was planning on like talking like that and then like pulling up the quick documentary video. My dumbass forgot to pull it up. Give me a second. God, I swear. And now my shit froze. There we go. Okay. There we go.
Na América Latina aconteceu de 2000 a 2014, com a eleição de
I'm trying to pause you.
Lagos.
There we go. Pausing.
O período de mais
Period with the most growth, the greatest distribution of wealth, and of the most social inclusion in Latin America happened between 2000 and 2014. The elections of Cristina Kirchner, Ricardo Lagos, Lula, Evo Morales, Hugo Chavez, Rafael Correa, golden age for Latin America.
Agora você está
We're now in the far right phase.
momento da extrema direita que estão fracassando
That's failing in absurd ways.
absurda. O Macri
is a disaster for
desastre na
Argentina.
Argentina e ele era a solução.
You're supposed to be the answer.
Tem livro.
Porque isso está acontecendo.
Why is this happening?
Tem livro
Where there's this book
do Mia Couto, que é
by the Mozambican writer Mia Couto,
moçambicano, que tem uma frase que é o seguinte: em
times of terror,
tempo de terror,
we
escolhemos
choose monsters to protect us.
para nos proteger.
Lula da Silva is currently the world's most prominent political prisoner.
Leaked chat logs published by The Intercept have proven that the corruption charges that put him in prison were politically motivated.
But how did Lula get such powerful political enemies? As Brazil's president from 2003 to 2010, he oversaw massive economic growth that brought tens of millions out of poverty. This success in the eyes of Brazil's elite was perceived as a threat to the social order and to their way of life. Lula himself understood this dynamic.
Ou seja, na América
Every time that
Latina,
president tries to
toda
enact
vez que apareceu presidente que tentou
socially
fazer
minded
política
policies in Latin
social,
America,
ele foi derrubado.
they're eventually ousted.
Todas as vezes. A elite
in Brazil
brasileira e a elite
and
de
other
outros
countries
países não aceitam uma
don't
política
accept
de
economic
desenvolvimento que
development
tem inclusão
policies
social.
that contain social inclusion.
Lula has seen this cycle play out before. Back in the early 1960s, Brazil was run by a social democrat who ushered in a series of left-wing reforms like the agrarian land reform and the nationalization of the privately owned oil refineries. The president himself was not a man with the left, but he was pushed thanks to vibrant social movements on the ground.
In the early 60s, many in the student movement were radicalized by the Cuban Revolution and saw the country's hard left turn as something to emulate.
The Brazilian elite were threatened by these reforms, even if they came short of revolution. Rather than respect the democratically elected president's mandate, they instead chose to support a military coup. Their plan received assurance and backing from the United States.
The U.S. military dispatched an aircraft carrier off of Brazil's coast to establish a presence in the region and delivered weapons to Brazil's police for the purpose of riot control. The U.S. was prepared to assist Brazil's military if they could not enact a coup on their own. Declassified documents have revealed that the Marines had planned to send troops to Sao Paulo to finish the job if needed. The dictatorship immediately aligned with U.S. interests and severed diplomatic relations with the USSR and Cuba. The student movement survived the military's initial rise to power in 1964 and continued to agitate and organize. In 1968, student movements exploded across the globe. Brazil was no exception to these uprisings. In March of that year, a flurry of students hit the country, culminating in 100,000 people marching in the streets of Rio de Janeiro after a high school student was killed by the police during a demonstration. This upheaval got the attentions of the United States and the CIA. While the CIA did...
Hold on 1 second. It looks like it's a little bit blurry or like buffering on the YouTube page. Let me just... This usually fixes it. One day, guys. One day I'll get my computer fixed, my nice computer, and then like we don't have to worry about this. One day. One day. Shout out to my Yahoo.
Did not see the students as an outright threat to the military junta. They did see the student movement as a source of instability in other countries that had spread to Brazil. The military dictatorship had to stabilize the situation, especially once public criticism had reached the halls of Brazil's Congress. Near the end of 1968, the military junta issued something called the Fifth Constitutional Act, which suspended all legislative bodies and gave the military the legal framework to purge its enemies. The student movement, as well as other social movements, largely went underground during the following decade. Meanwhile, Lula da Silva rose through the country's nascent union movement, actually managing to win some gains for workers in an incredibly hostile political environment. This climate meant that the metal workers union avoided strikes for most of the 1970s. Throughout the decade, to maintain legitimacy, certain aspects of democratic society were allowed to return in a limited fashion. Congress was brought back in 1970. The Fifth Institutional Act was repealed. Persons accused of political crimes could no longer be banished, and the rights of political expression were restored. The next year, the metal workers union, now helmed by Lula, seized this opportunity and went on strike for the first time since the dictatorship started 15 years earlier. During this struggle, Lula formed the Workers' Party, known in Brazil as PT. The PT's coalition was made up both of union workers as well as academics, intellectuals, and members of the liberation theology movement. The intellectuals were the political descendants of the country's student movement.
The dictatorship imprisoned Lula in 1980 because of his role in leading the strikes. This happened despite the regime's restored protections for political speech. During Lula's prison sentence, metal workers continued their strike and demanded the release of their leader. When Lula's mother died, he received a pass to attend her funeral. 2,000 workers met him at the cemetery, all chanting Lula Livre, or Free Lula. Lula was released from prison on May 20th.
The same day the strike ended. Lula's political work would now focus on building the Workers' Party as its president. In the early 1980s, inequality skyrocketed, leading to problems like widespread poverty, illiteracy, and malnutrition, in spite of massive GDP growth and economic development.
In 1985, the military could no longer coerce politicians in Brazil's electoral college. That year, the electors decided to elevate an opposition coalition to the presidency, and Brazil's dictatorship finally ended.
Shortly thereafter, Lula himself would be elected to Brazil's Congress representing PT. A constitutional assembly began to draft a new constitution, which would eventually be enacted in 1988. It protected the right to strike, banned censorship of art and literature. Land reforms were also proposed to combat inequality. But austerity measures to fight inflation caused by the dictatorship prevailed, hindering the advancement of Brazil's poorest citizens. In 1988, Lula made his first run for the presidency. Lula was able to survive until the election's final round, but he ultimately lost. Throughout the 1990s, Brazil's military and financial elite fought the country's political and economic reforms tooth and nail. Lula still could not win the presidency, despite strong showings in several elections. This changed in 2002.
After an economic downturn, Brazil's voters were looking for something new, and Lula, after several previous attempts, made it to the election's second round.
And I'm assuming, like, Michael might mention this soon, but like this is all a part, especially 2002, of the Bolivarian revolutions, air quotes revolutions, right? We got Hugo Chavez, Rafael Correa. We got a lot of people, a lot of left-leaning, socialist-leaning, if not just outright socialist and communist, in charge in Latin America, and it did bring in this wave of prosperity and largely of geographic independence from the U.S. First time, and you can argue 200 years, that you really had Latin American countries truly be independent from European powers. But anyways, back to this.
He would go on to win with a staggering number of votes, 52.7 million. Lula's landslide meant that Brazil's first left government in 40 years came in with a resounding mandate to deliver progress to the Brazilian people.
Você está lembrado qual foi a atitude?
You remember I asked you when I won the election?
Claro. Você está lembrado que
remember that I put every minister on a plane?
E levei todos os ministros
all to the
para
four most destitute
mais
places in Brazil.
O que eu queria?
Why did I do that anyway?
Eu queria que Meirelles,
I wanted Morales,
que era
a
banqueiro.
banker.
Eu queria que Palocci, que era médico. Eu queria que Furlan, que era empresário, conhecesse uma palacita, que visse o homem e a mulher no mesmo lugar que eles defecavam, eles comiam.
The administration prioritized combating hunger and poverty through its Bolsa Familia program. Employment and wages rose.
Educational opportunities were radically expanded. Spending priorities were put into place to phase out hunger, a goal that Lula would achieve in the second term of his presidency, and various other structural reforms which culminated in lifting 40 million people out of poverty. Brazil's elite saw these reforms as threats, and they were determined to put a stop to the PT. Nevertheless, they failed to beat Lula at the ballot box for his second time in 2006. Lula's second term, the economy boomed while living standards continued to rise for the Brazilian people. Under Lula's leadership, Brazil even managed to weather the 2008 economic crisis.
Mas é fundamental que todos façam sua parte. É importante que os empresários sigam investindo. É imprescindível que os trabalhadores defendam a produção e o emprego. Já o setor financeiro deve trabalhar para estimular o crédito e baixar os juros que estão muito altos.
He left office in 2010 with an over 80% approval rating.
Lula's successor, former underground anti-dictatorship activist Dilma Rousseff, won the 2010 election. In February 2014, the Lava Jato investigation began. State oil company Petrobras was implicated at the center of a massive corruption scandal. Dilma was accused of participating in the graft scheme, but no proof ever emerged. She managed to win re-election that fall, but plans to oust her were soon underway.
She would be impeached in 2016 in dubious and illegitimate circumstances by a corrupted political process. The Lava Jato investigation claimed to be taking a sweeping look at structural corruption that had plagued Brazil's political system, but largely focused on the PT and Lula. Lula, intended to run for president again in 2018, was instead put in prison, unable to run in a race that all polls showed him leading. Lula's absence from the ballot allowed for Jair Bolsonaro, a neo-fascist who praised the former dictatorship, to rise to the presidency.
I'm in favor of torture. I know that people are in favor of it too.
Bolsonaro governs with the support of the country's elites, as well as corporate elites including the Wall Street Journal editorial page. But his government has already begun to falter. A new student movement has hit the streets to protest education reforms, and the Lavo Jato investigation that propelled him into office has been proven to be politically motivated thanks to leaks published by The Intercept. Lula himself is confident that Bolsonaro and other authoritarians around the world won't last for long and are doomed to fail like the military dictatorship before them.
I wonder how many days they would think they're imprisoning me. However many more days they'll be there. More Lula will be born in this country, and more people will fight in this country. Because democracy has no limits. It has no time for us to fight. I'm doing something very conscious. Very conscious. Told the comrades, but I go because they will say tomorrow that Lula is a fugitive, that Lula is hiding. No, I'm not hiding. I go there in their beard, so they know that I'm not going to run. And for them to know that I'm going to prove my innocence. Yes. My first phrase I picked up in 1982 from a 10-year-old girl in Cataduba. Do not know who she is, and this phrase has no author. The phrase said the powerful can kill 1, 2, or 3 roses, but they would never be able to stop their arrival of spring. Our fight is in search of spring. It's awesome that this is happening. I really wish Michael was here to see this, man. Rest in peace to Michael. Condolences, obviously, to his friends and family still. As I assume that every time like these sort of stories come up, they think of him, just like we do, just like those that were influenced by him. But yes, that's it for Brazilian news. Let's move over to another Latin American country, Bolivia. Obviously, Bolivian elections late last year brought back in the movement towards socialism. The party that Evo Morales was a part of, and he was ousted for bullshit charges of voter fraud by the Organization of American States, the OAS, which is an American entity, the U.S. entity, I should say. And they said that there was massive voter fraud. It has been now proven that there was no voter fraud at all, and that Janine Anayes and the crypto-fascist, nationalistic Christian party that took power and led to massacres in Cochabamba, Tacuba, and El Alto. An untold amount of people were murdered, tortured, and disappeared ultimately because of this woman. She and many other coup regime leaders have been arrested, are now in the process of pre-trial for terrorism and sedition. You're going to see, honestly, if you read any Western outlet talking about this, it is it's continually framed from her perspective. The vast majority of quotes you're going to read aren't from anyone in the MAS party, which is the democratically elected party in control of Bolivia right now. Okay. You're not going to see any quotes from them. From the LA Times, the New York Times, Washington Post, The Guardian, Telegraph. It doesn't matter. CNN. It's all going to frame it from she is the victim of this persecution by this dictatorship, which is just ridiculous. She dropped out of the election before it really started because she was that disliked by the people. She even fucking run at the end. Okay? To paint this in any way that this goes against the will of the masses in Bolivia is fucking ridiculous. There are indigenous groups right now that are protesting in the streets, to make sure these people stay arrested. They already let one go after they arrested. I forget the name. I forget what position he was too. But this is what needs to be done. Like when you have a capitalistic counter-revolutionary element like the Janine Anayas regime, okay, that countered the indigenous revolution that has been going on in Latin America for decades now, okay, you have to squash that counter-revolution. You do. You can't let it go. Otherwise, it's going to come back and with more funding, with more resources, and with a better plan. Like, that's just a reality. You cannot ignore it. You cannot get away from it. Okay? This person and these elites in Bolivia are determined to give the resources to multinational corporations and largely U.S. corporations, and to allow multinational U.S. corporations to come in here and exploit the labor power of the people of Bolivia. That's what they want. Why? So they can get rich off the same fucking scheme. All power to the indigenous people of Bolivia. All power to MAS and all power to Luis Arce. Fuck Janine Anayas. I'm glad they fucking found her in a fucking box, hiding under her bed like the coward she is. I can't wait for Bolsonaro to get this fucking treatment. I can't wait for all of it. Because it's going to happen. Anyways, moving on. That's all I have to say about Bolivia. I will obviously keep you guys updated as we go forward. Speaking of another Latin American country, Ecuador, they had an election just a few weeks ago. In February, the first round of elections is going to be a runoff election, most likely. The popular socialist candidate, Andres Arruez, had won the first round of this election. And it's already receiving massive pushback from OAS again, rearing its fucking ugly head like it did in Bolivia. Colombia has now engaged itself and tried to smear Andres Arruez as a narco supporter, even though the right-wing puppet regime in Colombia has direct ties to the drug cartels in that country. We're not going to go into that. No, that's fine. That's all right. You know, you have Yuka Perez, who is obviously being made as like a Trojan horse, to be honest, in this election. You know, and he's doing it in a very smart way. Like, look, I will say this. Clearly, OAS and the U.S. State Department have gotten a little bit better about trying to oust or to block a popular leftist movement gaining power. What do they find? An indigenous person that's an eco-socialist, that claims to be an eco-socialist. What does he do? He rails against existing socialist countries like Cuba, like Venezuela, like Bolivia. He rails against them, okay? Criticizes China while saying he will do trade deals with the U.S. You know, this is what we have to deal with, okay? We have to be very aware and conscious of who can be co-opted, who is being co-opted, and be made to look like a friend of the working class. Because Yuka Perez is not that, okay? And it's not like Andres Arruez is the communist fucking reincarnation of Vladimir Lenin, okay? But he is exponentially better than Yuka Perez. The policies and the alliances that he can build in Ecuador and in the overall Latin American system is absolutely vital. Okay, if we get into a position where we have Nicaragua with Daniel Ortega again, we have Ecuador with Arruez, we have Venezuela with Maduro, we have Bolivia with Arce. Latin America has obviously Cuba with Rafael Castro. We have a firm, like strong, leftist majority, honestly, in Latin America. And then you add Brazil with Lula. Lula's not perfect. He's just, kind of a social democrat. Still a massive improvement, if we're being quite honest. It cannot be stressed the type of exponential change, the type of social uplifting that can happen in that part of the world if these people and these parties and these movements can gain some power and can push back the U.S. hegemonic control in the area. Shout out to the people in Ecuador. Shout out to Andres Ruiz. I will say this, that, I know everyone's always scared of going to the gray zone. This is a really good article. You want to know about Lenin Moreno or Luis Almagro, who is the leader of OAS. Lenin Moreno is the current president of Ecuador, who was a former leftist. Like, that's the craziest part. Like, Lenin Moreno came on the heels of a truly socialist communist movement and then changed. He got co-opted. You gotta be very careful about who we put our back in. Man, look at like Bobby Wine and Uganda, for fuck's sake, man. I'm gonna talk about Senegal soon, and I don't know a lot about Senko, so I'll be honest. I don't have like real in-depth takes about Senegal right now because I got really invested into Uganda. I trust a lot of quality sources about Uganda and Bobby Wine, and then we saw Bobby Wine give in to U.S. influence and recognize Juan Guaido as the president of Venezuela when he's not even an elected official anymore in that country. All in the sense or on the purpose of gaining U.S. support to take out Museveni in Uganda. That's the reason. So how do I think about Bobby Wine now? Not too high on him, But anyways, let me rant a lot on today's show, I feel like. Moving on to another Latin American country. I think this is the last one. Yes, last topic in Latin American news. Mexico. Obviously, the AMLO presidency, Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, I believe is how you pronounce that. I probably pronounced it wrong. I apologize. Or just called AMLO. He is clearly bringing in a wave of progressivism. I'm using that word specifically because I'm not going to say that AMLO is 100% even a social democrat. Like I wish Fugate was on the show because I know Fugate did a lot of research into AMLO and I just haven't. But when you talk about legalization of marijuana, when you talk about the nationalization of energy and to make that a public resource and to give the profits to the people, when you start talking about redistribution of wealth in that nature, these are all really great signs that are separate from the neoliberalism that Mexico faced from the 1970s up until maybe the 1980s, or I'd say the 90s, I should say. You had attempts to back away from neoliberalism in the 2000s, and the U.S., in a sense, I would argue, undermined that attempt by funding and arming cartels in Mexico. I think there's a direct link between the attempts of popular policies and social welfare policies in Mexico in the early 2000s and the insane influx of Mexican cartels and their power in all of Latin America around that same time. Obviously, since then, we've got reports that ATF, for example, smuggles guns and supplies to Mexican drug cartels. If you get an attempt to break away from the CIA, ATF funded drug cartels, undermine their power base by legalizing marijuana and taking the energy reserves away from U.S. companies, massive step. So I will give respect to AMLO if he's able to do both things. The legalization of weed should happen. It passed the lower house of Congress in Mexico. It should pass the Senate. And obviously it should be signed by AMLO after the fact. But pay attention to like this story, to be honest, like the energy debate. And especially as time goes on, what a country does with its energy reserves and how it gives it back to the public is indicative of how that country will handle the global ecological crises that we are facing. But anyways, moving on. Myanmar, let's do a little update here. A lot of violence has continued to happen. I don't have really any massive take on it yet because I haven't seen any sort of leadership come out of this opposition movement. I can't make a statement on that. It's hard to make a judgment call on a seemingly disorganized protest movement in this fashion and whether or not it's influenced by U.S. or Western powers. Like, it's hard to say that. It's really hard. But it's important to understand like what is happening in Myanmar because it will have a knock-on effect to other countries, just like it does in any other country, any other part of the world.
Defiant protesters again marched through the streets of Mandalay on Sunday. In strong voice and in large numbers, they were clearly unbowed by the violence of the day before. That's when the security services shot dead at least 6 people in a crackdown in Myanmar's second city and injured many more. But with the death toll rising, a call for revolution from the former vice president, now leading a civilian administration in hiding.
This is the darkest moment of the nation and the moment when the dawn is close. This is the time for our citizens to test their resistance against the dark moments.
Speaking of a new federal democracy, the message was clearly aimed at bringing diverse ethnic armed groups together to overcome the army and their coup.
When forming our resistance, unity plays a vital role. Despite our differences in the past, this is the time we must grip our hands together to end the dictatorship for good.
These diverse ethnic armed groups are scattered across Myanmar's borderlands. Divided, they don't represent a significant threat to the military who've been fighting them for decades. United, they could be a considerable obstacle. But there's long been distrust between these groups and the NLD, or National League for Democracy. Bringing them together would be no small task. In peaceful defiance, protesters break the curfew to honor the dead in candlelit vigils across the country.
We come out on the street to show that we are against military dictatorship by breaking the curfew order imposed by the junta. We will continue fighting.
But as the military continues with its brutal tactics on the streets, calls for a revolution that's not so peaceful may gain increasing support. Tony Cheng, Al Jazeera.
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if you see like a similar situation to Syria, where like you have all these different militias, ethnic groups that are vying for some sort of regional power and just dissolves. You don't have any sort of power base that can adequately fight that back, even though we probably don't want it to, of course. And the opposition is so disorganized that it really can't fight back the entrenched establishment in some fashion. Deeply concerning. And I have friends there right now. Shout out to Teddy. He's probably not listening, but shout out to Teddy, man. I hope he's doing well right now and being safe. A little update on India and its protests against privatization of banks. And overall, just the neoliberalization of India is something to be concerned about, of course. As I pull it up.
Public bank employees walked off their jobs and onto the streets of India to protest for a second day. They say saving public banks serves the interests of Indian citizens by protecting what they call social banking, people's savings, and keeping charges low.
These oppressive policies are against the country. We used to strike for an increase in wages or stopping a bank merger, but this is the first strike that the bank employees are doing to save the country.
Union members are asking for the public support, even as the strike disrupts some essential services, including check cashing and processing of remittances.
I needed money as I had to go to the market and buy something, but I can't get money, so I'm facing problems. One needs money as not everything can be bought with a card or transferred online.
There's anger after it was announced last month that 2 public banks and 1 insurance company would be privatized to generate millions of dollars in revenue. The COVID-19 pandemic has strained government coffers around the world. Local media report in the last 4 years, the government has merged 14 public banks and privatized 1. Negotiations between the unions and the government have not led to an agreement. More protests are planned this week. The unions say their strike could continue indefinitely unless the government alters course. Natasha Ganaim, Al Jazeera.
And we're going to get to it with China, of course, later. But like, what happens in India and China, I think, will have the future of India and China is the future of capitalism and/or socialism. I think as time progresses, you're going to see the hegemonic control of world markets and such, and it already has happened to a large degree. Fall out of U.S. and Western hands and be centered more towards Asia. Like that, it's just going to happen. It's inevitable at this point. The rate of economic growth in these two countries is just astronomical comparative to the U.S., and it's just not close. But digressing. What's the next topic? Let me see. Okay, yeah, Senegal. All I can say about Senegal is that there's been large unrest over the opposition leader, Ousmane Sonko. I believe is how you pronounce that name. From what I can tell of what I've gathered, he started out as a whistleblower against basically corruption within the government, and I think it was, what was it? I have it up here. He was a tax inspector and he was a whistleblower. He just basically exposed offshore tax havens by the ruling class of Senegal, the capitalistic class, and how it was offshoring money to basically Western corporations. He has since then, and that was like 2016, so that was a few years ago, right? That was 5 years ago now. He has since then sort of wrote a few books. I've not read those books, to be honest. I've just read about them. And they're basic social democratic understanding of trying to fix austerity issues, massive redistribution, programs of national wealth and resources, a protection of the environment, of course, especially in Africa. You want to protect your soil depositories in order to grow your own food. That's highly important, so you're not reliant on outside food and resources from the West or the global North. And just an overall sense of independence. He's called for independent currency in Senegal. That's not the French franc, which is still being used by several countries in Africa. So you see a quasi-socialist narrative or rhetoric coming from Sonko, and obviously that has been called for persecution against Sonko from the ruling elite in Senegal. They've accused him of sexual assault, which, it's been an accusation against any leftist leader we've seen, from Castro back in the day to Daniel Ortega now to fucking Martin Luther King Jr. to a degree, right? Like, this is an accusation, a persecution tactic a lot. And I forget what else they called him for. But digressing. And just overall incitement of violence. They've arrested him for that too. He got released from jail and then called for more protest, of course. And it's quickly devolving, it seems. Let's play this clip.
A night of celebration after days of protests. There he is, released on bail. Ousmane Sonko addresses the nation in this press conference. By his side are leading figures of Senegal's opposition.
The people are sending us politicians a message. No matter our convictions or beliefs, we have a responsibility to unite, reassure, and bring back politics to its noble cause, representing the people.
Several people died and scores were injured after he was arrested over rape charges. His supporters believe the case is politically motivated. The presence of the military did not deter demonstrators, nor did the tear gas, nor the police dressed in civilian clothes wielding baseball bats. Restricting the internet too did not stop the hashtag Free Senegal from trending.
Hundreds, if not thousands of people are gathering here, still defying the security forces who are firing tear gas. There's a sense among supporters of Ousmane Sonko that with the end of his detention, it's a victory for them and a reminder to the government that they're accountable not to big businesses and corporations, but to the people.
Demonstrators looted supermarkets, accusing President Macky Sall of failing the country's poor by protecting big business interests. After days of protests, he finally addressed the nation, realizing that the demonstrations were not just about Ousmane Sonko, but about many Senegalese feeling disenfranchised.
That a generation faced with so many hardships expresses its unhappiness is quite understandable to me. At the same time, let's avoid participating in anything that delays us in the quest for a better future. When you ransack a business, when you attack the goods of others, you don't create jobs, you destroy them. You don't reduce poverty, you make it worse.
The president extended the coronavirus curfew until midnight to allow small shop owners longer business hours. But for many, the protests are not just about the economic crisis or politics, but about defending Senegal's long-standing tradition of democracy and freedom, values protesters say are worth fighting for. Nicholas Hawk, Al Jazeera, Dakar.
And I think he gave an interview. I want to check out the interview because I really haven't heard him speak that much, so I want to check it out, see what I can gather from this guy.
For some, Ousmane Sonko is one of Senegal's rising opposition leaders. For others, including the state prosecutor, he's a rapist responsible for public disorder after protests erupted following his arrest last week. But Sonko, who's out on bail, says the allegations against him are politically motivated.
I have committed no crime. We can trust the justice system. In the way the case is being carried out against me, the tribunal is violating the law and the procedures in order to sentence political opponents. The prosecutor is not working for the state, but Macky Sall.
The government deployed extra security forces, including the military, to end days of nationwide demonstrations. Rights groups say hundreds of people are being detained. The protests stopped after President Macky Sall called for calm and dialogue in a nationwide address. But Sonko is calling for more protests.
What we are seeing right now is a revolution. But this is not a revolution to overthrow President Macky Sall. It's a smart revolution. We need to organize local elections that are 2 years overdue, then the parliament election in 2022, so that the people can freely elect a new leader in 2024.
Sonko describes himself as the anti-establishment candidate for the 2024 presidential election. Critical of Senegal's relationship with former colonial power France, he accuses the government of corruption, favoring French corporations.
Our relationship with France, like any other countries, need to be more balanced. It has to be a win-win relationship, not a one-way relationship.
Critics say Sonko's nationalist discourse is dangerous. During the recent protests, his supporters are accused of burning and looting French supermarkets.
Those looting are doing it not because they support me, but because they...
I just want to remind people France, right? He's talking about obviously being a former colony of France and a neo-colony of France in some fashion, of course. and he's talking about independence, true independence from France. France has assassinated 22 African presidents since 1963. I'm just going to say that again. France has assassinated 22 African presidents since 1963. Understand the power dynamic at work here, people. It's very important.
They need provisions. These are people that walk past the supermarkets, unable to enter because they can't afford it. The looting shows the failure of the state.
Scores were killed and many injured by security forces since Sonko's arrest last Wednesday. President Macky Sall blames the economic fallout of the pandemic for the unrest. For Sonko, the crisis calls for political change.
Those that died were 14, 16, 18 years old. They know their future is at stake. In honor to them and all those that are political prisoners of Macky Sall, we can't give up the fight.
But this is a movement that goes beyond politics. It's a call by young Senegalese tired of being ignored, wanting to be heard. Sonko believes he is the best suited to carry that voice. Nicholas Hawke, Al Jazeera.
So keep obviously focus on or pay attention to Senegal as the year goes on. Scott, even France knows that. Oh my God, Scott. Anyways, let me just clear up some of these tabs. Attempting to do it slowly. Save up some processing power on this computer. Okay, where are we at? We're at, okay, Yemen. Remember, guys? We're out of the Yemen genocide, right? That's what Joe Biden said, right? Oh, wait. There was major caveats to that? And he was basically just lying? Fuck, man. Thought for sure, man. Thought for sure that when Joe Biden said, "Hey, we're not going to do any more offensive campaigns against the Yemeni people," because that's bad. And then in a press conference after the fact, one of his officials said that, well, it means that class 2B, defensive operations, like, we're still going to partake, and class 2C offensive operations, we're still going to partake. Some bullshit jargon like that. And obviously the Saudis have launched more offensive campaigns into Yemen against the Houthi-backed militias, and the U.S. is obviously funding them, giving them arms and weapons. It's just ridiculous. Hold on, let me pull this up again.
The UN reports that, in fact, the siege is tightening.
Last month, no commercial fuel imports were allowed through Hodeida port. That's zero. In recent years, more than half of commercial fuel imports had been coming through Hodeida. This is the first time since the escalation of the conflict in 2015 that we've seen the level drop to zero. This is driving shortages and price rises.
The Biden administration is, however, placing the blame for the impasse on the Houthis, and the U.S. military is reported to be increasing its assistance to the Saudis.
No.
Such help is defensive and not offensive in nature. Shia Bertansi, Al Jazeera. The UN reports that, in fact...
No way, man. The U.S. is increasing its support for a genocide? Wow. The worst part is like, I have to like explain to like my more like lib-minded or progressive-minded friends, like when they hear stories and headlines like that, you can't just buy into it, man. Like when you hear about like a neoliberal administration doing something good, always question it, because most of the time it's not happening, or that's not really what they mean when they said that, and the actual policy that they put in is completely different. Whatever it may be, right? We know it's bullshit. Yeah, people just fucking eat that shit up. the back to like brunch crowd is just the worst. It's the fucking worst, man. Okay. To the main topic of the show. Let's get to it, right? Is China socialist? And before we get into it, sort of. Like that's like my answer. And like what is China? Like how do we analyze it? I think it's a complicated country with a complicated history, with its unique history and unique system as well, right? Like I think people when they think of like the Soviet Union and Maoist China or Castro's Cuba, right? Like they do think of it all as the same. Like Marxist-Leninism is just this one monolith, or like Ho Chi Minh in Vietnam, for example. But Marxist-Leninism is a way of analyzing material conditions and trying to prioritize or try to succeed in revolutionary aims despite of those material conditions, and then how to fix those material conditions in your country, even with the material conditions outside of your country. So meaning for Russia, for example, I'll bring up Russia and the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was a deeply illiterate country that was largely agriculture based. And when they had the Bolshevik Revolution, especially the October Revolution, 14 different countries invaded them. The material conditions outside the country, in terms of like who is pressuring them, the material conditions inside the country, in terms of the economic development, the mode of production that's there, the health of the people, the literacy of the people, these are all factors that affect revolutions, affect how governments are structured and formed. So when we talk about Vietnam or China or the Soviet Union, the Soviet Union, not Russia nowadays, or Cuba or Venezuela, they developed in unique ways. So while there is a lot of crossover, there is some uniqueness between these modes of governance, right? But regardless, they are all, how I would define them, as siege socialist nations, meaning that these countries, these nations, these states, they are under siege, perpetual siege, by the hegemonic control of capital. Okay? That's why it's, to me, preposterous to say, like, oh, these countries never really achieved full communism. It's impossible. Like, for China on its own to achieve full communism, a classless, moneyless, stateless society, right, is impossible with the outside material conditions at this present time. And even, you can argue, post-revolution, the material conditions within the country lead to an impossibility of achieving higher stage communism, which is the moneyless, classless, stateless society that we talk about, right? They're stuck in lower stage communism, which is socialism, okay? And I would, define it even more as siege socialism, right? They are under siege. And I think people want existing socialist nations to be like this pure ideological, like, wet dream. And that's just not reality. Like, it's just fantasy. So as we talk about China, I want that to be sort of the foundation of how we talk about it. It's an imperfect material nation and people, okay? Like every other place in this world, okay? Communism, anarchism, socialism, those ideologies, those theories are not about achieving perfection. It's never been about achieving perfection. Okay? But let's first, let's preface it first with this clip. I haven't listened to it, but I'm assuming it's decent, right? It's Richard Wolff talking about the Chinese form of socialism. And I understand, like, even this question, there's debate, right? Like, China, Cuba, Venezuela, Vietnam, there's debate amongst the left on what these countries are, how socialist are they, and stuff like that, right? But I would say, regardless, that my purpose here, what I feel like I need to do, what I should do, is to defend existing socialism. There's times to critique it, and there's times to defend it, okay? On this show, I'm most likely going to be defending existing socialism because I understand the material conditions within and without of that country. But let's play this clip from the great Professor Richard Wolff, who I don't agree with all the time. But let's, have some perspective before we play this video about did capitalism save communist China? Got to start it before we get into that with at least some background, intellectual, academic knowledge. I will also recommend highly, guys. I'm not going to play it because I don't think we have enough time, to be quite honest. Maybe I might play it. Is the David Harvey videos on the Chinese system. I think they are really good. And in fact, actually probably will play that as the bookend to this subject. Because even like Harvey, I don't agree with all the time, but his analysis is really good. Even he says he's not an expert, right? Like the great David Harvey, in terms of a Marxist economist, is like, look, I don't speak Chinese. I've been there a few times, not enough. So this information could be fluid, it could be changing, and that's always important to keep in mind. But let's play this clip.
Early on, the Chinese decided, the end of the last century, the beginning of this one, to hitch their economic wagon to the world market, to become the producer of goods and services for sale around the world. And in order to do that, they had to build industries that produced what the rest of the world did, either at a higher quality or at a lower price or both. And basically, they've done that, which is why Chinese automobiles, Chinese appliances, Chinese clothing, Chinese you fill in the blank is everywhere. Most of what you will see in an average Walmart is made in China. And there's a reason why Walmart stocks up on Chinese good. And they're not the only company, of course. So they hitched their wagon to the world market, and they've done very, very well because of it. The Russians couldn't do that, and the Chinese could, and they did. Here's another thing. Private capitalists didn't go into Russia hardly at all, but they have been rushing, stumbling all over themselves to get into China. And the Chinese understand that, and they offered Western capitalist enterprises the following deal. We need your technology, the Chinese said. We need your money, your capital to be invested. So here's the deal we offer you. We will provide you with well-disciplined, efficient, hardworking workers at a very low wage, the one that we have here in our poor country. And we will build the roads and provide the supports for you to be able to make a lot of money producing here in China more cheaply than you could ever produce in America or Western Europe or Japan, etc. All we ask in exchange is that you share your advanced technology, because that's why we're doing this with you. You will have access to our workers, and you will have access to our customers to sell your product. But we want your technology and your capital. Nobody put a gun to any capitalist enterprise's head. They made the decision to accept the offer of the Chinese because it was profitable for them to do so. If it meant that they laid off workers in their home countries, these capitalist enterprises, they could care less. They did that. They abandoned whole industries. They abandoned whole communities. That's how capitalism has always worked. Only this time, this destruction of working people in the West was a boon to the workers of China, which is why I gave you the numbers about the average real wage. So the Chinese used the world market, the deal they struck with private capitalists, and the lessons they learned from the Soviet Union to organize what they call a special Chinese kind of socialism that allows for private enterprise a considerable amount, allows for market dealings a considerable amount, but controls from the top through the state-owned enterprises the leading or dominant sectors of the Chinese economy.
Yeah, those SOEs, obviously, there was a massive issue with them in the late 1970s and 1980s. That's why, Deng Xiaoping, the successor to Mao Zedong, he brought in this wave of, for lack of a better term, neoliberalization in China that brought on these market reforms. And it's interesting to note that, like, whatever you make of these neoliberalization reforms of China and its economic system under Deng Xiaoping, when you see the contemporary at the time in the Soviet Union, with Gorbachev, of course, right? Their neoliberal market reforms were... It's a little bit different. I'll say this. Because what you had in the Soviet Union is you had a two-pronged attack by the West. One, you had the neoliberal market reforms that allowed Western capital into Russia and into Eastern Europe in, obviously, the late 80s and 90s. That's when you saw the massive hoarding of wealth and the creation of oligarchs, basically, in those countries, right? Is because of those moves. You had a few select amount of people gobble up the steelwork factories and such and achieve mass amounts of wealth. Look at Len Blabnik with DAZN and Warner Music, right? And on top of that, you had Boris Yeltsin and the political revolution, or counter-revolution, you can say, in Russia, right? It wasn't just neoliberal market reforms. It was a political coup, an armed coup by Boris Yeltsin when he brought tanks to the Russian Congress House and killed many people because in the mid-90s, the Russian people were not happy with these reforms. They thought it allowed too much power into Western capital and overall private corporations. There wasn't that top-down power from SOEs, state-owned enterprises, like you did in China, and overall the Communist Party in China that was still intact, that could rein in the market and corporations. And on top of that, when they achieve enough of, or when they gather enough of the technology and resources from Western capital, what did China do? They created their own companies. They created their own enterprises, own private enterprises to compete with them. That's why, for example, Apple Computers is not the most sold computer in China. They lost market dominance there just recently to a company called Rayu, I believe is how you pronounce it. It starts with the W. They were one of the top five companies in the world, I believe. And they're going to be probably the ones to break the barrier for artificial intelligence. Look at Chinese banks, for example. Chinese state-owned banks, right? Not private-owned banks like they did in China. They did in Russia. This is a state-owned bank. The state-owned bank is the 5th largest bank in the world. It's bigger than JP Morgan, I believe. Clearly, the neoliberalization wave that happened in the former Soviet Union and in China had very different effects. And I would argue that the effects of that were done because, or the lack of effects done, or control, I should say, the lack of control in these reforms in Russia was because the Communist Party was completely overthrown by Boris Yeltsin. The Communist Party with Deng Xiaoping, he did not overthrow the Communist Party. He was a part of the Communist Party. And he believed intently that he was still following Chairman Mao's wishes to some degree. But they had a massive issue in the 80s. Okay, you had 800 million people in abject poverty. You had to fix that. You had to get this massive wave of industrialization into China. That's why in like 2 years' time, China used more concrete than the U.S. in 100 years. Why? Because they needed to build cities. They needed to urbanize the entire populace. Because if you're going to have an influx of capital, you need an influx of the labor force. That's why they've removed things like the one-child policy, of course. But digressing, I'm probably going to speak more on this. Let's watch this video on Did Capitalism Save Communist China? And you can say without doubt that neoliberal reforms did save the stagnation of the complete planned economy that Mao Zedong proposed. And remember, Mao Zedong was also explicitly stated that he is not an economist. He is not good at running governments. Like after a certain amount of time, he was very very honest about his shortcomings. To be quite honest, he said he was a military leader. Deng Xiaoping was a economic leader in some fashion. That's the difference. And just to remind people, Xi Jinping, the current leader of China, they had a recent party congress, and they put in the new 5-year plan. And the plan is to eradicate all poverty in China by the year 2022, I believe, or 2024. So soon, the next couple of years, all poverty in China is going to be gone. Hunger, gone. And it's interesting. I don't know if I should say it now or later, but they talk about automation a lot in China because obviously their focus right now in terms of research and development is artificial intelligence. And I was reading something by Marx the other day in Wage, Labor, and Capital about how obviously if there's no wage laborers, you have no capital. You have no capitalism. Capitalism needs wage laborers, and vice versa. If there's no capitalism, you have no wage labor, right? Like that's basically what he said. And he combined it with automation. He talked about automation also in Capital Volume 1, and it was more of a fearful way of thinking about it. But if you view it in more of a modern day sense, I wouldn't be surprised if you have communist leaders in China thinking about automation as a way to sort of abolish wage labor because you don't need laborers anymore. And then you give all the social benefits to the people. You just have massive social programs that you use the profits and sort of commodities and production from the automation to give to the people. And it would be interesting to see how that affects the moneyless, classless, stateless goal of China, because they do state that is their goal still. Is automation a path towards eliminating wage labor and then eliminating labor and then eliminating capital? Possibly. It's quite possible. But let's do this.
How did one of the world's poorest countries, China, become in 30 years one of the world's richest? There is one word answer: capitalism. Here's how it happened. In 1949, the Chinese Communist Party, aka the CCP, defeated the Nationalist Party in the...
By the way, it's the Communist Party of China. It's the CPC. Only people that hate the Communist Party of China call it the CCP. I think it's an attempt to try to make them sound like it's like the CCCP, which is the Bolsheviks. But whatever.
The brutal civil war. The leader of the CCP, Mao Zedong, promised the Chinese people that he would create a new China, a socialist paradise where the benevolent state would take care of every citizen's needs, from shelter to education to employment. No more greedy businessmen. Factories would be owned by their workers. No more evil landowners. The state would own all property on behalf of the people. No more hunger. Everyone could eat as much as they want at the public cafeterias. To transform China into this heaven on earth, Mao launched radical socialist reforms. Industries were nationalized, private businesses were eliminated, and land was confiscated. But rather than turning China into a heaven on earth, these policies turned China into a hell on earth. Healthcare was cheap, but there was a chronic shortage of doctors, hospitals, and modern medicine.
Why was there a chronic shortage of those things? Well, because China before the Communist Revolution was not a single entity. Think of it as like Germany before we had Germany, where it was like Prussia, Bavaria. You had all these sort of like fiefdoms, right? That's what China was like to an even greater degree. China was ruled by warlords. Was ruled by regional warlords, and the Kuomintang political elite, the party that was in control of the recognized government in China, had very little power outside of a few cities, to be quite honest. So China was equivalent to like medieval Europe, okay, in the 1940s. Like, think about it, in the 1940s, China, well, also in the 1940s, China just was like maliciously invaded by obviously the Empire of Japan, the rape of Nanking. Like, it was horrific what the Chinese people faced before 1949 from outside pressures like Japan, let alone inside pressures like warlords fighting and competing for resources in arable land, right? Mao came in and broke up the paradigm of the warlords and the greater provinces of China. He was able to restore peace within the cities, which were horrific. The amount of obscene drug use to the point of mass overdoses. Like, there's reports of like every morning in like Shanghai or Beijing that they would have to come in and collect dead bodies on the streets every morning. Okay, because of the opium overuse. Why was there massive opium use in China? Because of the opium wars and trade brought in by the British. So Mao was able to unite a very fractured, a very feudalistic China, where slavery, child labor, these things existed. Okay. Child labor was outlawed by Mao Zedong. Okay. And for a populace that wasn't working, that couldn't eat, that their communities were destroyed, what did he do? He built massive commune system so everyone could have a community and work. And maybe it didn't work all the time. And he even admitted to his own failures in that. But to act like China was this hellscape now because of Mao Zedong is just not accurate. China drastically improved because of Mao Zedong, because of the communist revolution. Okay? Because the previous iteration was the hellscape. It wasn't one China. It was mass amounts of warlords fighting and killing people. Okay? You had feudalized landowners with serfs and slaves. Okay? I'm always of the mindset, if you judge a revolution, you gotta judge it by what it defeated and how it improved society. That's all that matters.
No one was unemployed because the government gave each person a job. But if you didn't like the job you were assigned, well, that was just too bad. Your government-assigned job was tied to your food ration. No work, no food. Speaking of food, it wasn't long after Mao took power that the white...
Dude, like in capitalism, if you don't fucking work, what happens? You don't eat because you can't pay for food. You don't fucking have rent, so you lose your house. You can't pay for a car. You lose health insurance. Like, what are you talking about here? You can't work, you can't eat in communism. Motherfucker, think about capitalism. What are you talking about here?
Widespread food shortages began happening. My own parents had to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning to stand in long lines outside of a grocery store to get a pound of sugar or several ounces of cooking oil. Often, they got nothing. Every year was worse than the last.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't. It was not every year was worse than the last. That's just not true.
Between 1958 and 1962, China experienced the worst famine in human history. An estimated 45 million Chinese starved to death, victims of their own government's murderous stupidity.
20 million people die every year from things like heart disease, malaria, lack of clean water. You know why? Because it's not profitable to fix those issues. Okay? 20 million people die every year. Every year, people die. 20 million people die every year because of lack of water, malaria, and heart disease. Okay? And the issue with like this famine, because it's when China wanted to eliminate all the pests, right? So like rats, mosquitoes, flies, stuff like that, and it had a negative effect on the agriculture, of course, because you need them to like pollinate. You need insects, honestly. And they only did that because there was some famines before, and the thinking was because of mass amounts of insects and rodents and pests, right? And it failed. It did. Do you know who admitted it failed? Mao. Okay. But for one, this number's inflated. That's not the real number. Two, like I said, the lack of profit in fixing issues leads to tens of millions of people dying every year. Let me make sure I get those numbers right on like why it happened. I don't think it's heart disease. I keep saying that, but I don't think it's heart disease. As I try to find it. No, it's not what I wanted. Okay. Where is this? I want to get it right. Make sure. Really? Where is this thing at? Am I blind? Probably blind. I just can't see it. Probably scrolled past it like 5 times already. Fuck, where is it? Hold on. It's important. So I want to get this right. Where is this thing? I saved the stat so I wouldn't lose. There we go. Sorry. I had it wrong. 8 million die from lack of clean water. Just under 8 million, 7.6 million die from hunger. 3 million die from curable disease. 500,000 die from malaria. A cumulative 20 million easily preventable deaths annually. The Black Book of Communism, right, which is the book that people often cite when it comes to these numbers, right, lists that communism killed 94 million people since 1917. 94 million people. Capitalism kills more people than that in 5 years. Just 5 years. Okay. I've been alive for 26 years, so let's just say 25 years, right? So in my lifetime, okay, just in my lifetime, okay, 100 million people have died when that could easily be preventable if you just didn't focus on fucking profit and surplus value taken from labor power. Like, that's all it would be. Like, if we just decide, hey, you know, as a society, monetary profit and hoarding it isn't, like, worth it. Like, let's focus on bettering ourselves and bettering our society. We could stop 100 million people dying every quarter century. Okay? Like that's the reality. We never want to talk about that. Right? And then we get some idiot out there saying, oh, well, you know, those deaths are happening in like Africa and South America and Asia. It's not the US. Who do you think owns and invests in those countries that lead to those people not having the resources to cure their illnesses? It's the global north. Sorry, let's continue this.
Among the lives lost were my uncle, my grandaunt and her family of 5, and my dad's maternal grandmother. At the time of Mao's death in 1976, more than 90% of the Chinese population lived below
If her family are landowners, I don't care.
the poverty line, earning less than $2 a day. The only equality socialism had achieved was an equal distribution of misery. Mao's successor, Deng Xiaoping, recognized that this couldn't go on much longer. The only way to save the CCP's one-party rule was to get the economy going. But how? Deng had no idea. Fortunately for him, a small group of farmers did. In 1978, these farmers, 18 of them in the village of Shaogang, made a secret deal with their village leader. After fulfilling the government quotas, they would be allowed to keep any surplus for themselves and sell what they didn't need. Such a move was risky because it was a rejection of the CCP's socialist policies, but the result was magical. The first year after this deal went into effect, the 18 farmers produced more grain than the entire village had produced in the previous 10 years combined.
Like, do I need to point it out? It's not producing. It's hoarding, right? You're hoarding that. Okay? Because you're keeping the surplus that you create instead of giving it over to the government for quotas so they can go feed people in your village. Right? And also, like, understand that the local communes, which is what these are, right? I know they're not using these words, but this village system is a commune system, had a lot of autonomy. Like, the food developed by this commune was given to its people. That's how it worked. Okay? Or at least half of it. Half the food would often be for the people in the commune. The other half would go to the cities. Because why? They wanted to urbanize the cities. So what you're doing here is you're taking food that could go to people, hoarding it to go sell it for a profit, while the rest of your village is eating this much. But you're only eating this much too, but you're selling that much to God knows who to profit off of it. I'm assuming that you did this with the labor of the entire commune, because the entire commune works on these farms. I'm just confused.
The Xiaogang model began to spread to other villages.
By the way, the Xiaogang model was not the model that led to Deng Xiaoping. It was I'm gonna get the name wrong. It was like the Gongzong River Delta. Like that is really the start of it. It's the areas around Hong Kong. Those were the start of the experiments in outside investment, the experiments in privatization, all happened around Hong Kong because Hong Kong already had private enterprise within that city. So this is just wrong too.
Didn't heard of it. Rather than punish the farmers, he had the good sense to recognize that these simple peasants had shown him how to revive China's economy. Soon after, Deng announced the sweeping economic reforms. He opened up China to the outside world, inviting foreign investments, and most importantly, loosening the government's grip on the Chinese people. The results were nothing less than astonishing. The freer the Chinese economy became, the wealthier the Chinese people became.
That's not really the case. Okay. What China did is that they invited, like Richard Wolff talked about, they invited outside investors if, one, they can use the technology, so have access to that technology, right? Access to the patents. And two, they had to be in a partnership with newly created Chinese enterprises. Okay? And most of them still SOEs, state-owned enterprises. While there is this flourishing private capitalist market and corporation environment in China, the large percentage is still SOEs, and it's still obviously heavily controlled and regulated by the Communist Party of China, the CPC. But what we see is that China would use that outside investment, and instead of giving piggybacks to these private corporations and subsidies so the people can starve, what they do, they launch massive infrastructure programs. They took the wealth and investment from the outside and did what FDR did with the New Deal after the Great Depression, right? To revitalize the people in the economy, was to uplift the people, not bring in austerity measures that focus on inflation control. That's what the Soviet Union did and Eastern Europe did. Okay, they brought in austerity measures to try to fix the stagflation at that time because it was so bad. China did not do that. Okay, China has built more cities, more roads, more hospitals in the span of a couple decades than any other country has done in the span of centuries. Okay, that type of public reinvestment, okay, is a socialist ideology. Okay, like I know people wanted to ignore that, but that's why you have this argument still for China being a socialist nation, because there's this top-down, Communist Party control of the economy, even over private enterprise. Okay, and the purpose of that is to reinvest the profit, the surplus value produced from the labor power of the Chinese people, and reinvest that back into the infrastructure and back into the Chinese people. That is absolutely socialistic. Okay? And we're talking about lower stage communism. It fits it exactly.
In the space of 3 decades, 800 million Chinese people emerged out of poverty. Chinese cities now match and exceeds the greatest cities of the West.
They do.
Skyscraper for skyscraper.
They did that with massive public spending. Massive public spending. These were not private corporations that built these cities. Okay. Then the private capital that was invested from Walmart was used to build these cities by state-owned enterprises. And they used the technology from Walmart and Apple and all these fucking companies and made their own companies to compete on the world market now.
The CCP likes to pat itself on the back for China's economic miracle. However, the real credit should go to free market capitalism and 18 brave farmers who risked their lives to get.
I've never heard of these 18 brave farmers. I don't know the names of these people. Like, I've never heard of this. I've read entire books on the neoliberalization of China. Okay? Never heard this story in my life. Never. Ever. But it's funny because, they talk about, China, it's capitalist now, but they still talk about it as this communist nation. Conservatives love to, have their cake and eat it too when it comes to existing socialist nations. It's hilarious.
Give it a try. In recent years, China's growth has slowed precisely because the current CCP leadership has moved back to a model that asserts ever more government control.
Oh my God. I love what they're trying to do. So Deng Xiaoping, he was a capitalist hero. And Xi Jinping, he's like Mao reincarnated, evil communist, asserting control. The same fucking government control that we have now in China was there in 1989 or 1999. What are you talking about?
The country is becoming less free with each passing year. The CCP uses technology such as facial recognition, surveillance cameras, and control of the internet to monitor its citizens.
The fucking Patriot Act. Do I have to bring that up? China uses security cameras and they control the internet there. What do you think the fucking US government does? What are you talking about here?
Every move. More and more, there are signs that the CCP is reverting to its Maoist past. That's bad for China and bad for the world. I'm Helen Rowley, author of Confucius Never Said, for Prague.
Fuck Confucius. That's all I gotta say. Oh my God. So good. That was, oh man, that was rough. That was rough. Jesus Christ. What do I want to play next? Okay. My brain's gonna melt again, probably. I'm gonna do this. Still on China. But a little bit of the fun half again. Even though PragerU should be the fun half, I just get so fucking frustrated. I probably would be frustrated here too. Joe Rogan had a former CIA agent, Mike Baker, on to talk about China's 2049 plan. Dun, dun, dun. If I want to hear about honest opinions and correct analysis of the global South, you got to hear from the CIA, right?
The Joe Rogan Experience.
I'm very excited to talk to you because I had a guy on, Jamie Metzl, yesterday, a scientist who scared the shit out of me, talking about China. He's talking about China. We were talking about China amassing naval power. China's taking over tech companies and how huge they're getting and how much influence.
Jesus fucking Christ. I'm already, guys, like fucking seething here. You want to know what China's military budget is? Hold on, let's just check it. Let's just check it out. Let's just see for a comparison here, right? I don't know off the top of my head. China's military budget. Oh my God. China's spending on the military is $174 billion. $174 billion. That is 1/7 the size of the US military budget. 1/7. Okay. We're talking about like the military budget of China is like 13% of the US military budget. What are you fucking talking about, Joe Rogan? Oh no, China, they're amassing Navy ships. Oh my God. Oh, they're taking over tech companies. Oh no. We can only trust US tech companies because we all know they don't spy on us, right? Fucking idiot.
Once they have over their people as opposed to the way we do it.
Well, he's not wrong.
No.
He's not, yeah, I can't spot the lie in what you just said, but
really,
I mean, look,
CIA agent.
I mean, there's so much we can talk about, but if you think about it, just in the past handful of months, there was this solar winds hack, right, by the Russians. So the Russians go in, they hack into a company called SolarWinds. There is an IT management software company that happens to be fairly deep into government organizations, agencies, Treasury, and a variety of others throughout the U.S. government. And they're also into parts of the intel community, Defense Department, and a lot of commercial sectors. So anyway, the Russians figure this out. Now, around about December or January, Microsoft, identified this as a problem. And I think it was the head of Microsoft said, this looks like the most sophisticated attack we've ever seen. So this is December, January timeframe. And they're still trying to figure out the depth of this hack by Russians. At the same time, and going back months and months and months and months before, the Chinese had been engaged in a more sophisticated attack that, while everyone is focused on what's going on and so fully aware that we got problems, right, from nation states out there who don't like us, everybody's talking about SolarWinds, and now it's, they've just now released information about the Chinese attack against Microsoft Exchange.
The Chinese attack on Microsoft. Oh no. You know what that means? Invasion time. Let's fucking go, right? Let's bring in the guns, right? Let's go. Fucking idiots, man. Fucking Neanderthals. I swear to God. Blood pressure, just relax there, man. It's okay. It's okay. This is the narrative. And I guarantee Joe Biden will not stop this at all. And if anything's going to actually ramp it up. War with China is a deeply concerning proposition for a variety of reasons. Other than the unethical nature of invading another sovereign state, which we love to do apparently. And we talked about already, these U.S. corporations, they sign these deals with the Chinese government when they enter the Chinese market to give over technology and to partner up with Chinese corporations. What do you think was going to happen? Honestly, what do you think was going to happen? And it's been used as an excuse. The same deals that these Microsoft and Apple execs and Walmart execs signed are now being used as an excuse to hate on China and push for military intervention, invasion, war.
Exchange servers, running the Exchange email systems. And this thing is enormous. And so the Chinese, yeah, I mean, we've been so focused for 4 years on the Russians, you know, and they're, you know, they're out there to cause us all sorts of problems. So we should be focused on them. But it's China that's the biggest problem. And so this guy is absolutely right. Jamie's right.
It was terrifying.
Yeah.
Listen to what he was talking about, the way he was explaining how they, you know, they have this plan. I think he said 2049 to be the global superpower of the world and essentially take the place of what America used to be.
Yeah,
they do it their way.
And they do it their way, which means we're going to bypass all the costs and the heavy lift of research and development over the years, and we're just going to steal everything.
Yeah.
And they've been doing it for decades. So people think, oh, China.
Dude, you literally worked for the fucking CIA. The amount of regime changes you probably sponsored to steal resources and labor, you should be in fucking prison. I don't even believe in prison, but you should be in prison. You fucking ghoul, man. Honestly.
It's a problem. It's a problem. We've talked about this.
You're the
before.
fucking problem.
You know, this idea
You
that
are.
perhaps this is just something relatively new, or it's popped up during the previous administration of Trump.
I can't wait for China to kick America's ass. Cannot wait. Bring it on. Fuck America.
And honest God's truth is it's been going on for decades. And they decided that that's how they're going to get to the top of the food chain, is by stealing shit, because it's a lot easier.
That's fucking capitalism, you dumb motherfucker.
To hoover up everything and then reverse engineer it. And the technology has made it even easier, right? It used to be old school. They'd go out and recruit somebody. They'd find some Chinese American working for a company here in the States. They'd appeal to sort of, you know, you got to help the motherland. And they would.
What? Dude, these companies willingly gave the technology to China. He knows that. He knows that. I don't know if Joe Rogan knows that, but this motherfucker sure knows that. He's not that stupid. He worked in the CIA.
And that was the old school way of doing it. But, you know, cyber theft it's incredible what they're able to do. And this latest attack, while they're still trying to sort out the mess, right?
So when they do this, so if they get into this email server, are they targeting?
Yo, Scott saying America doesn't strike first. Fucking Iraq. What are you talking about? Gulf of Tonkin, Vietnam. Like, what are you talking about? Grenada. Honduras, Panama. What are you talking about? The Philippines, for fuck's sake. Cuba. What are you talking about?
Anything specific? Is there specific companies? Are they just like throwing a net out there and seeing what they catch?
Yes, is the answer to both of those. It looks like what happened here was that their initial point of attack, or the initial focus, was intelligence, right? So then it branched out, and it branched out very, very quickly, right? To hit everything, small companies, medium-sized companies. And that's kind of the...
Yeah, Scott Brown saying, like, you're right, we should not now. Like, okay, go tell Joe Biden, hey, we shouldn't, like, go, like, invade countries. Is he going to stop invading fucking countries and bombing Yemen? No. 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 Saying, like, oh, we should not now, doesn't mean jack shit. You know why? Because we haven't built up a power base to actually fight off the fucking warmongering establishment that these fucking ghouls represent.
MO for the Chinese regime, right? Their
I didn't say
intel operations.
I didn't say I wanted to go to war with China, you fucking idiot, Scott. Come on. I say I can't wait for China to kick America's ass in whatever field we're talking about. Economics, geopolitical maneuverings in the global south. I don't give a shit. I love when China kicks America's ass. It's amazing.
They've got this long vision, and they've also got the resources, and they've got the desire to hoover up everything and then sort it out later. We take, as a country, we take a very sort of targeted approach, right? We say, okay, this is a piece of information that's a priority tasking for the U.S., for our national security. We're going to go out, we're going to figure out who has access to it. We're going to develop a very sort of surgical strike to figure out how do we get to somebody who's got this piece of information. That's typically how.
Dude, we fucking carpet bomb the Middle East right now. What are you talking about? Shut up. Shut up.
We or some of our allies would operate. The Russians, the Chinese have always had a different approach. I mean, the Russians is less elegant. The Russians are just throw shit at the wall and see what sticks, right? But the Chinese, they've got this long view, and they've also got this ability. And so in this particular attack that they're still trying to assess, that was perpetrated by, Chinese state-sponsored hackers based in China. They're just going to take everything, and then they'll sift through it. They'll figure out what.
Did you just say Chinese hackers based in China? Did he really just say that sentence? Okay.
God, a lot of it's going to be just chafe, not of interest, but they're going to find a lot of gold in there too, and they're willing to do that because they've got the patience to do it. They'll develop a target. They'll develop a potential recruit for years and years and years, or they'll infiltrate a society or an organization, right? They'll put a student out here who's actually working for the PLA for their intel operations, and they'll put him out as an undergrad. And then they'll go to school, and they'll get good grades, and they'll go to a grad school, and then they'll get a job, and they'll get another job, and then 30 years down the line, it may pay off. But they're willing to make that investment. So,
so we should be scared.
Well, we should be scared.
We shouldn't be scared, but we should, scared
of the country that has 13% of the military budget that you do. You fucking idiot.
Well, I don't think we should be scared, but I think what we should be is pragmatic and understand why. For instance, I mean, there was a lot of hue and cry over the past 4 years. I can't believe I just said hue and cry.
I don't even know what that means.
I don't know. It's just like, it's old timey.
Is it?
Yeah. Oh
Hue
my
and cry?
golly!
What is
Look
hue
at me.
and cry?
It's like the cat's pajamas. It's so 4 years of Trump and sort of his antagonistic relationship with China, and people were all wringing their hands in Washington D.C. Sort of the think tankers and the traditional pundits and the diplomats of the U.S. The long-term people. They're, oh my God, we've got this adversarial relationship with China. Well, you know what? We better, right? So that's not a bad thing. So I'm hoping the current administration maintains to some degree, and we'll see what happens. They still haven't responded to the solar winds.
It's really important for nation states to compete on the global market space in a neoliberal way of thinking. Like neoliberal theory predicates nation states battling it out on the global market. You need that. So this is just some fucking neoconservative, neoliberal fucking bullshit. Like it's good that there are adversaries. Why? Why is it good?
The Russian hack, right? They're talking about it. Now they're saying they're gonna engage in several clandestine retaliatory acts. Well, it's not that clandestine because they've announced that they're going to do it. And so, but I'm hoping that they will take serious action against the SolarWinds Russian act, but they've got to with China. They've got to maintain this posture. We've got to make it clear and understood to the Chinese regime that we're not going to put up with this shit. They're going to keep doing it, but we got to make it painful for them.
So how do you make it painful?
Well, it's the old word sanctions. You got to go with the sanctions because there's not much else. Trade wars. I know everybody hates a trade war. Not everybody, but you've got to.
Who loves trade wars there? Mike? Come on, Mike. Who loves trade wars? Huh?
Find a way, because the problem with cyber shenanigans is that there's no real clear definition, right? We know if a country fires a ballistic missile off, we know what the retaliatory act is. We know what an appropriate response is. In cyberspace, when you're talking about warfare, coming up with a definition is very difficult and hasn't been done yet. We've got Cyber Command, right? And we're still trying to sort out what are appropriate responses because it can escalate quickly, right? Next thing you know, they could shut down our infrastructure, right?
Well, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. Yeah. Supposedly what they did in...
The thinking that like China is going to purposely antagonize a country that one, they economically use, and B, or state second, not B. I said first. Anyways, secondly, they would be pissing off a country that has 7 times the military presence, and let alone whatever nuclear capability we have comparative to them. Yeah, China isn't going to do that.
In India. So if you could explain that to people, they shut down the power grid in India allegedly. They said they didn't do it, but apparently there was some sort of a warning about the power going out, right?
Yeah. They've done it. I mean, the Russians did it famously in Ukraine, right? I mean, not that long ago. And China's ability to
Russia is not China
interfere
Stop comparing the two.
Infrastructure here in the U.S. or in India or with our allies is because for years now they've been probing. There's been testing going on. You know, we talk about. It's a good example. We talk about how in the U.S. we have 3 grids, and I think people were stunned to find out that Texas has its own power grid. Well, yeah. But it's not so much. People were like, "Oh my God, look at Texas; they're terrible," because they wanted to make it a political thing, right?
Yeah.
They wanted to make it sound like the reason why it's so terrible is because it's Republicans and they want their own independence. Well, no, all 3 grids are fucked, right? The East and the West and the Texas grids are all cobbled together over the years. So it's a very it's like a patchwork quilt, and they were never built to withstand physical attacks. I mean, you could drive by any substation, right? You could get close enough to pee on it. And they certainly were never designed to withstand a cyber attack. So,
and
over the years, what goes on is essentially a mapping exercise, right? Where whether it's the Russians, whether it's the Chinese, whether it's the North Koreans using Chinese.
This is boring now. This is boring me. Honestly, I'm moving on. I'm sorry, guys. This is stupid. So fucking stupid. Like the amount of documented information we have on the CIA fucking people's power grids and fucking people's elections, removing democratically elected officials and killing them and sponsoring death squads that kill millions of people. Like, fuck you, dude. And like, Joe Rogan is such a mouthpiece for fucking imperialist propaganda. It's disgusting. Anyways, moving on. Let me skip some topics. Let's get to Jordan Peterson and Brett Weinstein. Did I say Eric earlier? I meant Brett. Marxism fears. And I will say this. Thank you for Brett over here for doing the timestamps, because this is an hour and 20 minutes into a 2-hour plus show that they did. So I do appreciate that. I do. Let's hear the fears of Marxism and all this stuff from the remnants of the intellectual dark web.
I realized something over the last several weeks, which is that there's something that has bothered me about the way those of us who fear Marxism argue against it. It seems to me that we very frequently say things about how Marxism goes wrong. And these things, I would say them very somewhat differently than most people, but by and large, there's some direct connection between the attempt to create a Marxist utopia and starvation.
Hold on. Already, you're wrong. Like, already, I can tell Brett Weinstein has read zero Marxist theory. There's a direct, explicit rejection of utopianism within Marxist theory. Okay. Like, think about what I said about, like, at the beginning of the China topic, like, no socialist entity is ever going to be, or communist entity is ever going to be perfect, ideologically speaking. Why? Because we all fucking disagree about things. Like, even within the left, we disagree about a lot of things. So it's never going to be perfect in everyone's mind. But the idea that like we talk about building in a utopia, we don't talk about that. We talk about building a more equitable society, one that the working class can actually benefit from their labor. That's what we talk about. That's it. That's really the gist of it. We want the working class to stop being exploited. We want their labor power to stop being exploited. We want the natural resources to stop being exploited for the hands of a very few. Okay. The labor and resources of the world is used for all, for the betterment of all. That's it. Okay. And if you think that's utopian, okay, then you think like Cuba is utopian, I guess. You think Bolivia is utopian. You think Vietnam is utopian, I guess. Like whatever you fucking think. But that's just the reality, okay? It's all about just the purpose of the economy, not its perfection, just the purpose, right? Like think about even capitalism, right? Like, is there a perfect capitalist state if you're a capitalist out there? No, but there's degrees of it. You know, same with socialism and communism. There's no perfect utopia that we talk about. That doesn't fucking exist. Okay. But it is undeniable that as a species, okay, as a human, as Homo sapiens, we need cooperation to survive. Okay. That is just an undeniable fact. It's an evolutionary fact of us. Okay. So the fact that we want to focus society on that evolutionary fact, the nature of us ourselves, on a cooperation, that we are naturally cooperative people. We are naturally people within communities. To focus on how to strengthen communities, strengthen the cooperation between us, and that being a prime focus is not utopian in any nature. It's just logical. But anyways, let's rewind it a little bit.
The attempt to create a Marxist utopia and
oxymoron.
Starvation, authoritarianism, and I think I know what this is. And actually, it goes back to the question of group selection, which is.
Excuse me? Last time I checked, socialist nations or communist nations or Marxist nations, they guarantee things like food. You know, there's a reason why China is going to eliminate hunger in their country in the next year. Okay, and we aren't. We're not anywhere close to that. We haven't even attempted to do that. Okay, there's a reason why a tiny, tiny little island that has economic embargoes and blockades for 60 fucking years, and yet they live longer. Why? Because of Marxism. It's not because, we breed starvation and totalitarianism. We actually bring on more democratic systems than capitalism does, especially within the workplace, obviously. But even within political institutions, the Cuban democratic system, I think, is quite incredible. And I think people need to talk about it more. I played the clip, I think, on the last show about how is Cuba a democracy. So I revert back to that. If you want to figure that out, go back to our last show. I covered that. But he's just wrong on every level here. And it clearly has never really looked into Marxist theory other than reading the Black Book of Communism or what's it called? The Archipelago. What's it called? It's a fucking book. Forget the name. It's one that Jordan Peterson wrote the foreword of about the gulags, about the gulags under the Soviet Union. Ooh, the gulags. Go read a book about U.S. prisons.
Because these systems are game theoretically unstable, because they punish those who do more and reward those who do less, in order to get people who are harmed by that, that is to say, those who tend to contribute more and are therefore punished by such a system, to adhere to it.
Communism does not punish those who produce more. We just differ, us and them, on who we define as the producers. Right? Because if you're a capitalist with X amount of money, you have all the means of production, you have a factory, all this stuff, and you want to build cars or textiles or whatever you want to fucking build, right? Computers, whatever it may be. If you have nothing, if you have no laborers to actually set capital in motion to get it working, to get the factory moving, then guess what? Your capital stagnates and it actually devalues and you don't make any profit. You don't make any surplus value. You don't make any commodities without work, without the laborers, without the working class. So the producers, in the Marxist way of analysis, is not Jeff Bezos. It is the cumulative nature of all the working people within that company. They are the ones that set the capital in motion for production, for commodification, and obviously for distribution and sale. It is them. It's not Jeff Bezos. He has the capital because of primitive accumulation. Okay. But the acquisition of more capital can only be done by labor power. Only way to do it. And the labor power of the laborers is what sets capital in motion, not the labor power of the capitalist that just owns the means of production, owns the commodities, owns the money, and then sets it in motion by just paying wages. Anyways, let's go back to this.
You have to threaten them.
Right. They're unplayable games. And you have to enforce them by force because people discover they're unplayable.
Right.
Yeah. So that unplayable game, I just want to elaborate that because you said game theoretic and you're going to lose, you'll lose a bunch of your audience because of that. But these are, stop me if I mangle this, but game theorists are interested in the repeatability of interactions. And some forms of interactions degenerate with time. Those aren't sustainable. They're not good games. As you play them, you get bored by them or hurt by them. You don't want to keep playing. Some games maintain themselves. And I would say we have an ethic that teaches us when we're playing a sustainable game. I think that's the voice of conscience. That's related to the points I made earlier. Your Marxism, as it's instantiated, is actually an unplayable game. And you gave a reason, is that you can't set up a system that punishes people that are productive and rewards people who aren't, even if some of the people.
That's not Marxism, socialism, or communism. So like this straw man imaginary thing that they've thought of is what they're railing against, and it's just not reality. It's not reality based. Saying that Marxism hurts those that produce more is just wrong. Marxists want to protect the producers, the actual producers in the economy, which is the laborers, the fucking workers.
Are only miming productivity, and they're actually power-hungry tyrants. You can't clump them in with the competent people and punish all of them.
Yep.
Now,
and if you try, in order to stabilize it, in order to get those who are being punished for contributing not to defect, you have to.
Is there argument that Marxism is, in terms of game theory, is unsustainable, but capitalism, in terms of game theory, is absolutely sustainable? Is that their fucking argument? When capitalism has crises every 5 to 7 years? Really? Really? Huh.
You have to threaten them so that authoritarianism follows quickly on the heels, as does in many cases the failure of the system to deliver even basic well-being, hence starvation.
Well, and Piaget pointed out quite explicitly.
Again, Cuba's infant mortality is lower, its life expectancy is higher, its literacy rates is higher than the U.S. fucking empire, which sanctions them and blockades that country. But no, Marxism just breeds starvation and totalitarianism, you fucking idiot.
Because he was very interested in games as the basis of morality. That a game that you have to punish people to adhere to is going to be outcompeted by a game that people will play by themselves.
Bingo.
Yeah.
So a natural ethic. So we make this argument, many of us who have this particular concern, we make this argument or some version of it. Here's the argument that I don't hear. The argument that I don't hear, but I'm certain that I believe and have believed all along, is that equality of outcome, even if you could achieve it, is in and of itself not desirable and certainly unjust.
I would love to talk about that.
I thought you might.
In these dudes' minds, saying things like, everyone deserves food. Everyone deserves a house. Everyone deserves health care. That's unjust. Think about it. Like, me stating everyone deserves food, regardless of work output, from each according to his abilities, to each according to his needs, right? The classic Karl Marx saying. And they think that's unjust. Why do they think that? Like, how much of a sociopathic person do you have to be to think that, it's unjust to think that everyone deserves food, shelter, medical care, regardless of status, class, work output, all that stuff. Like, imagine that. Like, imagine your basic argument is like, I want there to be a situation where we cause homelessness, where we cause economic destitution, and the well-being of people to deteriorate drastically. Like, that's what they're arguing for. And look how giddy they are about it. Like, it's so weird to me. Sociopathic fucking people here, man.
So my argument is very simple, right? What you want is a system that leverages well-being in order to generate improvements. So in other words, you want the reward that comes from successfully competing to get individuals to contribute to collective well-being.
This like need for competition, this need for like a survival of the fittest mentality, when we need each other to fucking live. That's the reality, especially in a global economic system that we have now. We need everyone to be doing better, period. Moving on. I just can't. Because I thought it was going to be better than this. I'm actually disappointed. The Jordan Peterson comeback tour has been very disappointing, people. Let's be honest. Not the same. Not the same vigor. Let's hear Ben Shapiro and Representative Ro Khanna debate on the $15 minimum wage. Obviously, Ro Khanna is not a socialist. He's more of just a quasi-social democrat. But he's a decent progressive. He's not the best, but he's decent. And I want to hear their debate on the $15 minimum wage.
It's a pleasure to welcome onto the program Representative Ro Khanna. He represents California's 17th congressional district, located in the heart of Silicon Valley. He is serving his third term. Representative Khanna is, of course, a Democrat. And for that, we're extremely grateful because it's fun to have on people from the other party and actually talk through the issues. Representative Khanna, thanks so much for joining the show.
Why is he, of course, a Democrat?
And thank you for having me on. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, you bet. So let's talk about minimum wage, because you sort of made the news last week when you were criticized for some comments that you made about the minimum wage and small businesses. The implication seemed to be that if businesses weren't paying a higher minimum wage, then maybe they didn't deserve to be in business. So what did you mean by those comments?
Well, let me clarify it. I am a strong supporter of small business. I understand the need for small business. I do believe in a $15 minimum wage. My belief is that the Amazons, Targets, Walmarts can easily pay that. But I understand that small businesses may have a difficult time in doing that. That's why it needs to be gradual. And that's why we need to have tax credits and other assistance to small business so that they can do that.
So let's talk about the actual policy.
Hot take here. If you're a small business and you can't afford to pay your employees $15 minimum wage, when the actual living wage is around $22, $23 that have kept up with productivity since the 70s, you probably shouldn't be in business, or at least you shouldn't be exploiting your workers. Sorry.
The actual $15 minimum wage. So I obviously am an opponent of $15 minimum wage. When it comes to the minimum wage, there are a bevy of studies, including Congressional Budget Office studies, suggesting that it depresses employment, that for people who actually receive the minimum wage, of course, they get paid more. But for a lot of other people, it pushes them out of the job market because it is not like businesses actually just have a.
No, those studies show that highly exploitable job positions and industries get pushed out when these types of situations happen. Okay. Yes, those people lose their jobs, but guess what? They then go and get another job that actually pays them what they're worth. Okay. Like, especially if you're a capitalist, you probably think that anyone on the job market can get a job. So what's the issue here?
A giant Scrooge McDuck money bank out back, and they're just holding a bunch of cash out there in order to somehow, disadvantage their employees, that there is a labor market in which there are a lot of people willing to work for a particular wage, and that they're paying the labor essentially what the labor is willing to accept.
The market is a tool to undermine the wages of laborers. Okay. It is an explicit aspect of capitalism, okay, to pit laborers against each other to drive down their price if you're the capitalist. So the whole purpose of a minimum wage is to try to get a Band-Aid on that issue. That, hey, we know that you capitalists will undermine wage labor as much as possible and compete them against each other as much as possible to drive down the price of labor power. So here's the base level where you can do it. You can't do it below this level. That's what it is. Okay. And Ben Shapiro is like, no, if you're out there and you're competing on the labor market and, if you say you can do the job for $1 an hour, that's okay. If you want to be a slave, then be a slave. Hey, no issue. Fucking idiot.
In order to work at these particular jobs. When you're talking about competitive job markets, especially at the lower end of the wage spectrum, isn't it true that there is a supply and demand issue that actually develops the wage? Or why do you think that it's artificially low, in other words?
Sure. Let me suggest the two places we disagree. Your view, as I understand it, is this is a contract between two free individuals. Why is the government, the state, getting involved in trying to set the price? My view is that in certain cases, especially where you have monopsonies, where you have a high concentration in labor markets, there are only a few buyers. It's not a truly competitive market. It's actually a market failure. And so you have a wage that is under the competitive market price. In fact, Milton Friedman in 1976 wrote about this possibility that monopsonies could distort the market wage. Second,
first off, Ro Khanna bring out Milton Friedman against Ben Shapiro. Point for Ro Khanna. That's hilarious. I'll give him a point for that.
And I think this is just a good faith disagreement. You would argue people have genuine bargaining power, and you have this concept of negative freedom, that the state shouldn't interfere. My view is that more of positive freedom, that people actually need basic support to be able to bargain effectively. And I don't think that there's true equal bargaining power often.
So there are a couple of issues that I see in some of the stuff that you're saying here, just on the specific level. Obviously, the vast majority.
By the way, Ro Khanna, I kind of killed that. That was kind of all, like, yes, I pretty much agree with everything you just said.
Of employees at places like Amazon are actually not making the minimum wage. The fact is that the minimum wage is only being made by something like 2.3% of all wage earners in the United States. About 50% of those wage earners are under the age of 25. And when you artificially boost the minimum wage, what you actually end up doing is making it harder for people who actually need the minimum wage jobs to get those jobs, because you have artificially created a base in the labor market from which employers are going to draw. So in other words, a $15 wage is the kind of wage that you pay to somebody who graduated from college. It's not typically the kind of wage that you pay.
Dude, if wages had kept up with productivity since the 1970s, Benny, before you were born, okay? If it had kept up with productivity, the minimum wage would be $23. Okay? And that's like public information. That's just fucking math. Okay? And he has the gall to say that, $15 is what you should get after you get out of college? To take on all that college debt? Are you kidding me? Wow. Wow. And yes, those Amazon workers are not paid $7.25. They're often paid what the state minimum wages are or the city minimum wages are, which is often higher. Like, for example, California minimum wage is $15 an hour, right? So California already has a $15 minimum wage, right? Or is it LA? I believe it's all California. But it doesn't matter because let's say that those workers are paid 12, 15, whatever it may be, right? They already paid that number. They're already paid more than the minimum wage. They're paid $10, whatever it is, Benny. Okay. That number is still drastically below the number that their labor power produces. Okay. It's not that hard.
For somebody who graduated from high school. And you see this historically with the minimum wage. When the federal minimum wage was increased, then people who went to high school had a much higher employment rate before, and then the minimum wage was increased, and then the unemployment rate among high school educated rose dramatically. It is not racially equal that way, actually. Minimum wage increases have disproportionately hit Black and brown people without college degrees, particularly. So why is raising the minimum wage overall a good idea?
Well, but you're right. Right now, maybe it's 2.3%. I take your word for the study, but that's at $7.25. And there are 30 million or so of Americans who make between $7.25 and $15. Now, I think the studies go both ways. Some people have argued, and there's studies showing that it increases productivity, it makes workers happier, it actually increases a business's profitability. I agree, there's studies showing that that may not be the case. One interesting study I saw is that what it really forces businesses to do is require high school as a credential. And this a fair point would be saying that this may make it more difficult for those who haven't finished high school to get one of those jobs. But for 90% of Americans who have a high school degree, they will be able to get that job and pay more. So I guess the studies are in.
And the solution to that isn't, hey, let's keep all these people paid less. It's no, if it's difficult for those without high school degrees to get these jobs, then fund GED programs to get these people that don't have degrees to get degrees. It's not that hard, right? Just funnel money into social programs that can solve these issues, right? Solve these little gaps in the policy. Scott Brown, thank you. Shareholders need their capital gains. Yeah, they do, man. I guess they do, man. They need their capital gains. You're right. Yeah, they need those dividends.
There are studies all over the place on this. My view is that the country would be better off with a higher wage that would help productivity, help the happiness of our employees.
No, I mean, the simple kind of rebuttal to that is if it really improved profitability for businesses to provide higher wages, then they would do it. Meaning you wouldn't need the government to actually step in and force them to do it.
Benny, you should know this. You run a corporation. I bet you try to keep your overhead costs as low as possible. Why? So your income, you can get a greater yield of the surplus value, right? It doesn't matter if, hey, you know what? If I put X amount of dollars into my overhead costs, I'm going to get Y out of it, right? I'm going to get more out of it. I mean, Y plus X out of it, whatever it may be, right? But you still don't want to do that because you want to keep overhead costs low. Like that is capitalism 101. Keep costs low, keep profits high. That's it.
That businesses are profit driven primarily.
It's a fair point. That's if you believe that businesses always are acting in their rational long-term interest. My view is that sometimes businesses are very short-term focused and may not be making the long-term investments. But the second case is, let me ask you, are there any times you believe that the government should interfere? For example, overtime laws. We're required to pay time and a half. Would you support that? There are a lot of times that the state has made regulations to say that this helps the bargaining power and makes for a better labor market.
Yeah, and I'm very much against virtually all of that. I'm extremely libertarian when it comes to labor markets, particularly because I believe that monopoly is actually created by some of the regulatory innovations that people have come up with. In fact, I think there's a reason why big corporations have typically pushed for a higher minimum wage when it becomes clear this is going to happen, because you're right, Amazon can absorb that blow a lot more easily than the.
It's fucking good PR, man. But then again, like Ben Shapiro thinks like Amazon, when they put BLM on their Twitter headline or whatever, or header, that like that actually means Amazon is a Marxist plant, and they want to like absorb the Communist Party into America and change the fabric of American identity. Like that, like he's that fucking stupid.
Mom and pop shop that is down the street, it actually increases their ability to drive other people out of the market. If everybody is required to pay a higher wage, then Amazon can spread that out over the price of its product. It can spread it out over its 83% market share in like the book market. It can upcharge people on the product in a way that small mom and pop stores cannot. Increase in minimum wage, obviously disproportionate.
Then what's your solution, Ben? Huh? My solution would be to break up Amazon. It's an antitrust issue at this point.
Affects places that have 3 employees as opposed to places that have 300 employees, of which 30 are actually minimum wage employees.
But you're right about that, and this is you're right that the impact on certain small businesses is harder, and that we have to take action to help those small businesses. I mean, I acknowledge that that point. I will say though that in small communities, rural communities, often you have the case that these are highly concentrated markets, and in that case, you have employers having a lot more monopsony power to be able to set the wage in not truly competitive markets. But to the extent that my comments in the past were not sensitive enough in the way I phrased it to the challenges of small business, I acknowledge that challenge. I agree with you that it's going to be much harder for certain small businesses, and we have to be honest about it. I mean, we can't, I want to engage in an honest conversation, and to pretend that there's small businesses that aren't going to be effective and that.
I hope those small businesses are affected. That's the difference between me, like personally, me and Rokana. He sees those exploitative small businesses and goes, you know what? Poor little them. And I go, poor little them. They're still exploiting the workers. If they can't, oh no, they can't exploit them anymore. Darn it. Like, I don't see the issue here. But I get that Rokana is not a fucking socialist and he's a politician and he's placating to more of a right-wing base right now.
Be helped would not be correct.
We'll get to more with Congressman Ro Khanna from the 17th District of California in just 1 second. He's a Democrat from Silicon.
I'm good. You want to break up the show, Benny? I'm going to move off of that. I haven't seen this yet, but it's Dave Rubin clips. I always love Dave Rubin clips, and it's Dave Rubin's War on Math. Again, I have no idea what this video is about. I'm just going to watch it. Should be fun.
You know, this thing is how many pages here? You've got, it doesn't even have page numbers. It doesn't even have page numbers. So you guys would like that, you wokesters, because I know you guys don't like math. So there's no page numbers on
What? What? Wokesters don't like math? What?
this thing. How much is a yearly subscription to the New York Times? Let's find it out. Let's find out what it is, and I'll try to come up on the fly with some things that would be a better use of the money. It's got to be what, a couple $100 yearly subscription to the Times. We're going to work on that.
$30 probably.
We'll get back to that. All right, I'm going to jump on to the next story. We're going to work on that one. It's okay. So it looks like it's $17, $8 every 4 weeks for 1 year. $8 every 4 weeks for 1 year. Give me the math on that. Bust out some math for me. Who's got a math? You got one of them there calculators on that computer? It's $8 every 4 weeks for 1 year. So multiply that by 52. Can you do that? 8 times 52. Somebody help me here. We're ballparking. It's about $400. It seems like it's about $400. Work with me? Yeah, about $400. Okay. Boy, I got two mathematicians over here. Okay. The point is, for $400, whoever you are, I'm sure you can find better things to do. You can buy a really great bottle of like high-end tequila.
War never changes.
Oh my God. Oh my God. No, you gotta wait. You know,
this thing is how many pages here? You've got.
Damn it.
It doesn't even.
Stop it, computer. Okay. Let's do. Hold on. I saw a couple videos on Twitter I wanted to play before we get out of here too, so I'm gonna play those before I play the David Cross video. Hold on. Let's do. Hold on. I saw a couple videos on Twitter I wanted to play before we get out of here too, so I'm gonna play those before I play the David Cross video. Hold on. 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 Twitter. Remember, guys, hit the like button, share the show, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Patreon.com/Trending Now Network. And Cash App, Trending Now Network. As I pull up my Twitter sphere, slowly but surely. I haven't seen it yet. I haven't seen either of these videos. One of Steven Crowder and one of Candace Owens, I believe, talking shit. I can't find the Candace Owens one. There it is. I'm going to play the Candace Owens one first. Says WAP being performed the Wet Ass Pussy song by the amazing Meg Thee Stallion and Cardi B at the Grammys. That performance at the Grammys signify the end of an empire is the headline. And I can only say I sure hope that is the case.
Any words about it. They call this great. They say this is fabulous, that this is the stuff that children should be aspiring towards. So at the same time, Tucker, that we have kids that are not learning hard academics anymore in school, right? Forget about mathematics and science. You can trust the science and trust Dr. Fauci, but you have these kids learning about critical race theory. They're learning that they should aspire to people like Cardi B. That you see that fundamentally we are seeing the destruction of American values, American principles. And it's terrifying. I think parents should be terrified that this is the direction that our society is headed towards. And again, we are weakening America. That's really what we should be talking about. This is a weakening of American society. We are setting the stage, and it feels like we are looking at corrosion, like we are about to see the end of an empire. America cannot survive. It cannot be sustained under these sorts of values and principles. Any words about it? They call
the end of an empire. Let's fucking go. I'm gonna be right back. I'm gonna take a little 1 minute break. I gotta go get something really fast. I heard a doorbell ring, so let me go get that and I'll be right back. Yes. I am back. Yes. Sorry about that. Had to go quickly deal with that. Oh, that's funny, Scott. All right, we're gonna play this clip from Steven Crowder. Hold on, let me get it full screen here. It's apparently a racist tirade, so warning for anyone that's listening, I guess. Apparently it's against black farmers. I don't know what it is. Let's check it out. It went viral, so I want to see what it is.
Find this many farmers of color, but they did, and 5.2 billion are being allocated exclusively for colored farmers. Farmers of color. Roll the tape.
We begin today's show looking at a major provision in President Biden's $1.9 trillion COVID relief bill that aims to address decades of discrimination against Black, Hispanic, Native American and Asian American farmers who've historically been excluded from government agricultural programs. The American Rescue Plan sets aside $10.4 billion for agriculture support and allocates about half the funds to farmers of color who are, quote, subjected to racial or ethnic prejudice because of their identity as members of a group, unquote. The U.S. Commission on Civil Rights confirmed as long ago as 1965, the U.S. Department of Agriculture discriminated against Black farmers, but little was done to address the
100
problem.
years ago.
Yeah, most happy about the new policy. These people. So, yeah.
How do people think like capital accumulation works? Like if you had no capital 100 years ago, you have no capital now. Sorry. Like you're if you do, you got very fucking lucky, man.
Yeah, most happy about the new policy. These people. So, yeah. I'm gonna buy a plow, man.
I'm gonna plant that corn.
Go get a John Deere. Barack Obama, mother. I'm the president of plowing that ass. You.
What the fuck? What?
I thought the last thing they would want to do was be farmers. Wasn't that a big problem for hundreds of years?
Yeah. Isn't that why Arsenio Hall called them?
What the fuck, man? Did he just make a slavery joke? Like, what the fuck is the matter with these white dudes, man? Like, the hell? I don't even want to play the rest of that. That's just disgusting. Oh my god. Wow. That dude still on YouTube though. Yeah, still on YouTube. Crazy. Crazy. Well, let's try to have a palate cleanser on that shit because horrifying. Let's play this video from Gravel Institute. It's gonna be the last video we play, and then we're gonna head out of here. From actor David Cross, who's a little bit of a lib sometimes. I'm not the biggest fan of his political takes, but he's narrating this one on why America sucks at everything. I think that is pretty accurate.
America is the greatest country on earth, the strongest, the richest, the most powerful country on earth. As an American, I'm sure you've heard that roughly 135 times a year. 235 if you go to public school. 335 if you go to a Christian academy.
Facts.
We're told that Americans have the best lives of any people in the world, that we have low taxes, small government, and the highest living standards on earth. And most inaccurately, that we're the freest. Well, it is partly true. America is the richest country, not just in the world, but in the history of the world. It's really hard to comprehend just how rich we are. We have 18 million people who are millionaires. American households own about $100 trillion in wealth, an almost unthinkable amount of money. Okay, so America is the richest country ever. But there's a curious paradox. Most Americans actually have a much worse standard of living than people who live in poorer countries like Germany or Finland or Britain. But how can that be?
Cuba.
That shouldn't make any sense. Well, here's the shitty deal. Americans get significantly worse services because our tax dollars don't fund them. So, of course, our services are worse. And thus we enjoy less happy lives than people who live in the aforementioned countries. Not that difficult a concept to conceive, really. You get what you pay for, said the cartoon dog to the other cartoon dog. And while you might think the reason American tax dollars don't fund as many services is because we pay lower taxes than other countries, that's not even true. When you add federal, state, local, and sales taxes and include other costs and services that our taxes don't cover but other countries' taxes do, like our uniquely high health insurance premiums, you'll find that Americans actually give away more of their wages than most of the developed world. For example, in Canada, for a married worker with 2 kids, all of the previously mentioned costs combined, from taxes to health insurance premiums, make up only 11% of the average wage. In the UK, it's just about 26%. Meanwhile, once you tack on the cost of our outlandish health insurance premiums, you're spending a whopping 43% of your paycheck. That's more than France, Finland, Sweden, and Norway. In real reality, Americans keep much less of what we own than in other countries. In other countries, their government takes a bit more tax, but then gives that money back to their citizens in the form of healthcare or job support, or a general safety net for all vulnerable citizens, no matter how dusky they are. So what do Americans get for the money we pay in? Well, sure, we get a crumbling infrastructure, shameful homelessness, and millions of hungry, neglected children, but we also get some of the worst services in the developed world. Again, our healthcare. American healthcare is simultaneously the most expensive, the least efficient, and the least effective healthcare system in the developed world. Hey, the devil's trifecta. And in exchange for this extremely expensive, inefficient healthcare system, what do we get? Well, we get some of the worst health outcomes in the developed world. We have fewer hospital beds per capita than people in Turkey or Brunei. Americans have a lower life expectancy than people in Lebanon or Cuba. And in the Mississippi Delta and much of Appalachia, life expectancy is lower than in Bangladesh. In fact, in 2017, the United Nations sent a commissioner to West Virginia to document what he saw, and he described, quote, third world conditions of absolute poverty, unquote. We even have a higher infant mortality rate than people in Russia and Serbia. In every single metric, America does worse across the board. So why is healthcare so expensive? Because it's so complicated. You have to look for in-network physicians, schedule an established care appointment, beg for coverage from your insurance company that couldn't care less about you, and that's if you're lucky enough to have good insurance. Compare that to Britain and all of those other evil, socialist-like countries where it's simple. Public hospitals provide free treatment to people who need it. That's it. I'll repeat that. Public hospitals provide free treatment to people who need it. And here's the best part. Even though Britain offers healthcare for free, their system is actually a lot cheaper to run than ours. Per capita healthcare spending in the US is almost 3 times what it is in Britain, and almost 5 times what Canadians spend. In fact, Americans spend the most per person of any country in the world for healthcare. But the free market is more efficient, you screech. But in America, private systems often aren't efficient at all. Private drug companies have an incentive to charge whatever they can get away with for pharmaceuticals. In Canada, a carton of insulin costs about $20. In the US, it costs $300. And with private insurance companies footing the bill, hospitals have an incentive to get as much money out of patients as possible too. In 2015, the average cost of an MRI scan in the US was $1,119, but it was only $215 in Australia. Spain, about $181. And our healthcare system is so inefficient that we spend over a third of our cost on administration. The United States spends significantly more on administration than we spend on preventative or long-term healthcare. That's just not smart. Okay, we get it. We all know that American healthcare is so much more expensive, you say, but that's the cost of having the freest freedom in God's favorite country. Well, guess what? Medical procedures that are totally free in Britain, like giving birth, cost tens of thousands of dollars in the United States. I mean, you want to talk about the cost of freedom. Sadly, because of these high costs, Americans often avoid going to the doctor, something almost half the population say they do. With shoddy or non-existent health insurance, Americans will wait until their conditions force them into the emergency room where treatment is far more expensive. Again, not a smart system. Quite often, they end up putting off medical visits and dying. Susan Finley, a 53-year-old Walmart employee in Colorado, got pneumonia and took one day off of work beyond what Walmart's policy allows. So of course, Walmart's going to Walmart, which they did by firing her. Without her job, she lost her nominal health care coverage, she struggled to find new work, and after avoiding a visit to the doctor for flu-like symptoms, she was found dead in her apartment. When Americans do manage to get treated, they frequently can't afford it. Simple, life-saving treatments can cost tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars, and if they don't have really good insurance, they're forced to take on medical debt. Tens of millions of Americans owe medical debt, often into the tens of thousands of dollars. Meanwhile, in a country like Britain or Norway, medical debt is almost unheard of. But hey, that's why GoFundMe is such a critical component of American healthcare. 1 in 3 GoFundMe campaigns is now for medical bills. I'll repeat that. 1 in 3 GoFundMe campaigns is now for medical bills. America is such a strong, powerful, rich, and great country that its citizens have to beg strangers on the internet for money so they can get life-saving treatments that are free in the rest of the developed world. But hey, that's just healthcare. Americans get terrible deals wherever you look. Let's take work, for example. Americans work longer hours than people in any other rich country in the world, and that's not because they enjoy sleep deprivation and not seeing their families for days at a time. It's because they don't want to starve or freeze or die. See, America has the least generous job support programs, the least generous family benefits, and the least generous unemployment benefits of any wealthy country. It's one of the only countries on earth that doesn't guarantee paid time off for vacations. It doesn't even help provide paid time off for parents who just had a child. And it's not coincidental that we're also one of the most hostile countries to workers' rights. America has one of the lowest unionization rates in the entire world. Maybe this deprivation, our refusal to give people the means to lead a good, dignified life commensurate with how rich our country is, can explain a bit of what we've seen in the United States over the last few decades. Fraying communities, rising rates of depression and suicide, huge numbers of deaths from drug overdoses. These so-called deaths of despair, suicide, drug overdoses, alcoholic liver disease, they're one big reason why American life expectancy has actually started to decline over the last few years. And with such poor conditions, it's not a surprise that poverty is so rampant in the United States. America devotes a smaller percentage of spending on social welfare than any other industrialized economy because, say it with me, socialism is evil. It's evil. Go to Denmark and try telling those happy, healthy families enjoying their paid vacation that their system of government is evil. Guess what? I guarantee they'll know you're an American. But I digress. America also has the highest rate of child poverty of any developed country, and the highest percentage of workers earning significantly less than the national median income. That seems pretty evil to me, especially since such a tiny fraction take as much of your money for themselves and their families as you will let them. All the while, both parties smile and shake hands. Across every single metric, no people accept a worse deal than Americans today. High taxes, high cost of living for next to nothing in return from the government. The most expensive healthcare system for the worst health outcomes. More money taken from workers for the highest rate of child poverty. We are the richest country in the history of the world, but we have fewer miles of high-speed rail than Uzbekistan. We are the greatest country in the world, yet we have the most people in prison of any country, and the highest incarceration rate as well, and a higher rate of police killings than in Angola and Sudan. America's bad at everything because instead of choosing to make life better for people through a public healthcare system or more generous childcare policies or better public transit or programs that allow people to spend more time with their families, American law is designed and crafted to protect a class of parasitical middleman industries. Instead of using a proportionally tiny piece of the massive amount of the wealth in this country to make people's lives healthier and happier, most of our elected leaders are and have been for generations engaged in a massive project of looting, gently and lovingly guiding as much money as possible from working people into the pockets of the well-connected and the ultra-rich. Think about that as we start hearing about the inevitable rise in homelessness, poverty, starvation, and sickness that will occur during these coming months and years in the greatest, strongest, richest, most powerful country on the face of the earth. I'm David Cross for the Gravel Institute.
Ladies and gentlemen, that will be it for this show. Hope you enjoyed it. I'll be back on next week sometime. History of Socialism, episode 5 or whenever it is. Coming out whenever it comes out. I just ordered like 12 more books for research on this episode. Yeah. It's going to be a while. Summertime. Let's say summertime. I'll probably finish it. Yeah. Anyways, hit the like button, share the show, subscribe. Find me, Matt Hunter, MCR, all social media platforms. Patreon.com/Trending Now Network. I was on the Southpaw podcast on Patreon, by the way, Southpaw Sports, talking about scandals in boxing and some politics and sort of like how I got into politics and boxing and combat sports and all that stuff. Anyways, have a good day, good evening, good night. I will see you all next week. Peace.